Before Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, or Sandra Bland, there was Oscar Grant. The current movement against police terror and for accountability and justice can trace its first iterations to this moment, when Oscar Grant was killed by a Bay Area Rapid Transit police officer on January 1st, 2009. Captured on numerous digital devices, Oscar's death would be the first murder prosecution of an on-duty Bay Area police officer. Before that would occur, however, Oscar would be murdered in the media and in the court system. It was a triple murder. No doubt, the murders of Oscar Grant tells this story.
Tis woman's strongest vindication for speaking that the world needs to hear her voice. Anna Julia Cooper wrote those words in 1892. You would think she's speaking about today. White supremacy and patriarchy, by definition, belittles and ignores the voices of Black women. Some of Us Are Brave, a Black woman's radio program, was a corrective to that, centering and airing the voices, views, and experiences of Black women, documenting them and capturing moments in time. The program aired on Pacifica Radio for almost a decade. Many of those voices have been preserved here, and Some of Us Are Brave, interviews and conversations with sisters on life, art, and struggle. Edited by Thandisizwe Chimurenga.
Greetings, free some land, Black August Resistance. How is everybody doing today? Can y'all hear me? Can y'all hear, sister? Let me get they probably can't do emojis in the chat, huh? Somebody type, I can hear you, or something over there. Can y'all hear me? Can y'all hear me? Can y'all hear me? I think you can hear me. Ain't nobody saying nothing. Thank you. Took you long enough. No, I'm just messing with you. How are y'all doing today on this Sunday afternoon / evening for y'all East Coast folks? My name is Thandisizwe Chimurenga, and this is Rootwork on Black Liberation Media. Usually I show my face when I do a Rootwork show on Black Liberation Media, but today I just couldn't get it together. So I'm going to be talking to y'all from the void so that you don't get distracted. We're going to focus on this text today. Actually, 2 texts. I'm hoping that I can get it in. We scheduled it for 2 hours today, 5 p.m. to 2.5 hours, 5 p.m. to 7:30, introductory remarks, and then go into some readings and discussions for y'all who have questions or want to say stuff that I can address. So I'm hoping maybe the first hour we can talk about Sanyika's book, read from and talk about Stand Up, Struggle Forward, as much reading as we can. And then on the next hour, we're going to get into The War Before by Safiya Bukhari. That is the plan. The best laid plans of mice and women, you know how that go. But that's what we're going to attempt to do today. So again, my name is Thandisizwe Chimurenga, and this is Rootwork. It is the second day of Black August. So this is the Black August Study and Struggle session. I try to do something every August on Rootwork around Black August resistance and around studying. So yeah, we're gonna read out loud in case you all do not have the book, or in case you got the book, started it and put it down, or in case you ain't never cracked it open. Black August resistance, there are, if you look in the right places, there are enough histories, enough of the correct, proper, true history of Black August out there. I probably should rehash it. I'm not going to, because It's going to take a while. But if you know about Black August, then you know about studying, and you know about the importance of studying. You know about the importance of collective study. And that's one of the things that the brothers did in the penitentiary. They would study together, not just study, not just read, not just, read and sit and think on it. They would struggle with the ideas. They would do it in communion, in collective. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to do. Because again, like I said, you may have this book and just ain't got to it yet. And if you know anything else about Black August, you know it's about commitment and recommitment. So one of my commitments, or one of your commitments, could be to do some more reading, to get to some things you haven't gotten to in a while, get to some things you have not finished. So that's one of the things that I want to do. I figured Black Liberation Media is the perfect space for that, right? So why not utilize this while we got it, and let's get into it. Hey, y'all. Appreciate y'all showing up. Appreciate y'all coming through. Like I said, I hope y'all are doing well. That's hilarious. Yeah, y'all not showing y'all faces either. Right. Let's see. Hey, Panther and Joiner, how are you? Salam. Good evening, good afternoon. All of that there good stuff. All right. So I am going to pull this up. Let's see. We're going to start with our dear brother. Oh, no. Don't do that. Don't do that. Do not do that. There we go. We're going to start with our dear brother, Sanyika. Sanyika Shakur's Stand Up, Struggle Forward. Now, as you all know, I've said before, it ain't a Rootwork show if it ain't some technical difficulties. That's not speaking it into being. It was already being. I'm just acknowledging it. Let's see if we can go. Ooh, I wonder how we going. Yeah, that's going to be rough for y'all. I don't know. Y'all ain't going to be able to read that at all. Y'all are not going to be able to see that at all. Yeah. Well. Yeah, I'm not sure how we going to do this for y'all. How are we going to do this for you all? Man. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to figure it out. Yeah. So I'm going to read it to y'all. I was hoping I could have it on the screen where you all could get an idea of what I was reading. I don't know if that's going to actually work. All right, so probably what I'm going to have, that's just not presentable at all. So I think what I shall do is, y'all can zoom in. Well, I don't know. Comes in clear on the phone. Zoom. Now, when you say hold on real quick. When you say 3 different channels, what you mean? Manifesto, I know it should be on the Rootwork channel and the Black Liberation Media channel, and it should be where you can, should be, what is that word? Portrait and landscape, where you can either hold your phone or be on a desktop or a laptop. So anything else, I don't know what's going on, but I'm not feeling this All right, she said you could zoom in. It looks so ugly, though. I need to hurry up. 15 minutes. 15 minutes in. All right. I don't know how we're going to vote on this. Do you want me to put the pages on the screen or do you want me to just read? Whoa. Hurry up and say something in the chat. Is there a link to the text? Yeah, I don't have a link to the text. Don't have a link to don't have a link to a PDF or an electronic version of the book. I don't even remember who the publisher is, but I do know that it helps us independent writers if you can buy our book. You can read it. If it's giving me grief now, hey, that's 3. I can read it. Somebody like being read to. Somebody said read it. All right, we're going to, 4 people said read it. We're going to, well, 1 person said both. Either way, we're going to shut off the voting right now, and I am going to read this to y'all. That's what I think I'm going to do. All right. So this is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. New African Revolutionary Writings on Nation, Class, and Patriarchy. Let's see if we can get through this first chapter real quick. And if you haven't read the book, by the way, if you're not familiar with it, the foreword to this book is by a brother by the name of Yusef Bunchy Shakur. You should be familiar with that name if you hang out here on Black Liberation Media. He is one of the hosts of Dare to Struggle, Dare to Win, which airs on Wednesdays here on Black Liberation Media. This is Sanyika Shakur's last book, 2013. It was put out by a publishing house in Canada called Kersplebedeb. They do a lot of leftist and anarchist books that they sell and also publish. This book is dedicated to Nahanda Abiodun, Susan Rosenberg, Assata Shakur, Sylvia Baraldini, Butch Lee, Aminata Umoja, and the revolutionary legacies of Safiya Bukhari and Marilyn Buck. This is chapter 1 of Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur, formerly known as Monster Kody, author of Monster, the autobiography of an LA gang member. He then did a novel called Thug Life. But the title of the words Thug Life were all spelled as an acronym. I have to admit I have not read that book. Now, he's got some poetry in here. He's also got an interview with J.R. Valerie of Block Report in the Oakland Bay area of Los Angeles. I'm going to skip those, and I'm going to go right to Sanyika's writings. This first writing is called Study and Struggle and Overstanding. He begins with a quote by Atiba Shana, who is of the Rebuild Collective in Chicago, Illinois. Brother Atiba has passed on. But his writings, one of which is Meditations on Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, are excellent works for you all to digest. Hopefully I can put it in a link to their website in the chat at some point, or somebody else can do it and be helpful. That would be nice. At any rate, Study and Struggle and Overstanding. Quote by Atiba Shana, who are we, those of us who would build a national Black prisoners organization? There's much hard evidence to show that as each day passes, more and more Black prisoners identify themselves as New Africans and work on behalf of the New African Independence Movement. Sanyika begins, across the expanse of a couple of decades, we've seen the political consciousness of prisoners grow in proportion with their overstanding of what it actually means to be a prisoner in America, but also as nationals of captive nations held in partial paralysis by U.S. imperialism. Prisoners have slowly begun to take an objective view of the matrix of U.S. colonialism from a dialectical perspective that informs us that the settler government holds, dominates, and exploits both external and internal colonies, and that the old facade of disadvantaged minorities is giving way to the stark reality of submerged nations here under the blurry veneer of a so-called United States. That's the first paragraph. Let me stop. I'm attempting to just dive in and get on up in here without too many preliminary remarks. Black August, the New African Independence Movement, these are things that I have not fully described in the beginning, even though many of you probably already know about it. It's usually good practice to go back over that type of information. I did not do that. There's plenty of information out there on the web. I should have included it here. I did not in the interest of time. One thing I will say, though, is that as we know that Black August comes from the prison movement, California in particular, it is very apropos to begin or to deal with the issue of prisons and writings by those imprisoned during the month of Black August, because that is where Black August comes from. These brothers, and it's been primarily brothers, in these penitentiaries, in California in particular, felt that they were an extension of the Black liberation movement. The fights that they conducted inside of the prisons, they felt were the prison corollary to the overall civil rights and Black liberation movement struggles. They did not see themselves as separate. They saw themselves part and parcel. And nowhere was that more exemplified than in the life, writings, work of Comrade George Jackson. Okay. This developing consciousness springs from a revolutionary nationalist overstanding of social development, informed by even the most rudimentary application of dialectical materialism. One is easily drawn to the reality of New Africa, Aslan, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, Alaska, and the indigenous peoples being submerged and colonized, whole nations existing under the false patina of Americanism or patina. So yeah, all of these places such as Puerto Rico, which we've had Rosa Clemente here on the show before. The view of the New African Independence Movement and others is that all of these places, yes, Hawaii, the 50th state or 49th state, these places are all colonized nations fighting to be free. The greater our overstanding of this reality, the less we are believing in or relying on the old, obviously false social construct of race to define ourselves and other oppressed people. Color or race as a binary term to describe the shallow differences between humans, having no scientific basis in reality, is not a deep enough, nor sound or reasonable enough overstanding to explain, confront, and resolve our problems. Check in real quick. Checking in with the chat. Seeing over here. Okay, it don't look like y'all. Look like y'all all right. I'm gonna keep going. It's been said that the color of freedom in America is green. This tells us something about the false construct of race, no? It hints at the fact that under the rubble of race is bedrock, and that bedrock, that solid foundation, is economics, is capitalism. We can't even discuss, or we shouldn't even discuss, racism without mentioning and combining it with capitalism. For capitalism built the social construct of race around itself as a motto, a defense, and a justification for prolonged activity. Capitalism is the material manifestation. Race is the shadow or immaterial reality of what casts it as a consequence of the original form. It's not that it's wholly unreal. We can see it, the shadow, I mean. We can even feel it, but it is but a reflection. We'll exhaust ourselves to the point of madness trying to combat it alone without applying destructive force to the material thing that it reflects. To be anti-racist is to be anti-capitalist. We become anti-racists by not using binary terms constructed to promote and sustain race. I think I'm going to read that one again. To be anti-racist, no. We'll exhaust ourselves to the point of madness trying to combat it alone without applying destructive force to the material thing that it reflects. To be anti-racist is to be anti-capitalist. We become anti-racists by not using binary terms constructed to promote and sustain race. Now, we have a quote here. Any attempt to destroy racism without an explicit link to the struggle against capitalism ultimately serves only to reinforce racist ideology and to shield capitalism from attack. On the other hand, an attempt to combat capitalism without an explicit link to anti-racist discourse and struggle allows capitalism to use the belief in race held by oppressed peoples and appeal to the racism of citizens of the oppressive state, thus undermining all revolutionary initiative. This combat also requires that we begin to delink ourselves from the use of language that reinforces and reproduces racial ideology, e.g., the terms white and black, in reference to the identity of peoples. Let me see. Unfortunately, because I do not have the book in front of me, I apologize, y'all. I'm reading from my computer. That's unfortunate. That is a quote, and there's a footnote. I cannot get to the footnote, therefore I cannot tell you who the quote is from. But we're going to just work around it and keep it moving. In our developing consciousness, which is necessarily new African, revolutionary, and nationalist, we are needing new tools, new language, new ideas, means, and ways to rebuild ourselves into a coherent whole for movement and struggle. We are talking about cadre development. This will come about only through arduous study and struggle. See, here's the basic thing. If you are calling yourself a new African, and I am, then you are at once saying that you are not an American of any stripe. You are rejecting the reactionary / colonial identity placed arbitrarily on you by the enemy culture. You are implying that you are a citizen of the Republic of New Africa. Further, this means that you understand that a new African nation exists and has existed in North America at least since 1660. Now, nation here is not to be confused with a state or government. A nation is a cultural, custom, linguistic, social development that is consolidated and evolves on a particular landmass and shares a definite collective awareness of itself. New Africa, as a distinct entity, a totally working class nation, has existed since 1660 here. The nation was given shape, name, general laws, and a creed in 1968 with the founding of the provisional government by over 500 new African nationalists. Established at this historic convention was the New African Declaration of Independence, Code of Umoja or New African Constitution, and the New African Creed. A president, vice presidents, People's Center Councils, and a People's Revolutionary Leadership Council were elected to designate New African population districts, set up registration for a New African census, etc. This was the forming of a state, an organized body designed to coherently give shape and form to the already long existing New African nation. So, we are not trying to create a nation. The nation exists. We are trying to agitate, educate, and organize the nation for land, independence, and socialism. This can only be realized through revolution. And despite what we've recently seen in North Africa with their Arab Spring, again, this was published in 2013, we are under no illusions about our struggle here being a protracted, long drawn out revolutionary war, and truthfully, necessarily so. We have a lot of cleansing to do after existing so close to the seat of world power for so long. We overstand our level of contamination. We are talking about being ideologically consistent, about pushing a particular line. Again, I want to go to Comrade Yaqui because his instructions are profound. Yaqui is Atiba Shana or James Sales, the author I spoke about, the Meditations of Wretched of the Earth, founder of the Rebuild Collective, which exists, well, not founder, inspiration for the Rebuild Collective, which publishes the Crossroad Vita Wawatu books. These were all writings, theoretical journals that came out of the prison movement. And so when he says he wants to return to Comrade Yaqui as a quote, there was that quote in the beginning, Atiba Shana, and then possibly, even though I cannot see the footnote, it may have been the one that I just quoted from. Angolan, Russian, Algerian, Chinese, French, Vietnamese, Cuban, Korean, Tanzanian. These are nationalities. Our nationality is New African. We don't refer to ourselves as Black because we don't base our nationality nor our politics on race or color or a biological element of our being. Social factors are the primary determinations of our national identity and our politics. That's the quote. The same reason we don't call ourselves Black is also why we don't call ourselves African American, Negro, colored, etc. These are chains which tie us to the plantation, to the colonial system. These are terms that substantiate, promote, and sustain the colonial mentality and thus our oppression. Again, Comrade Yaqui's words instruct. All right. Got to figure this out. Let's see. I'm just checking back in with y'all over here in the chat. Hold on one second. Chitimasha. I'm not going to pronounce it the other way. If you search the War Before Internet Archive, has it for free to read along. Cool. We're going to be getting to that in the second hour, I sincerely hope. So I needed to just pop back over here real quick. Make sure y'all are still here. Make sure I ain't done nothing to get rid of y'all. All right. Let me go on back over here to Brother Sanyika. So again, Comrade Yaqui's words instruct. The native, the Negro, the colored, the Black, and the African American have no identity apart from that given them by the colonizer. That is, not unless they resist colonialism, which entails 1, their maintenance of an identity that is separate and distinct from that of the colonizer. 2, they begin to develop a new identity through the process of decolonization. Through having remained separate and distinct, colonized people aren't who they were prior to colonization, and they can't return to the past. Colonization has arrested their independent development, distorted who they are, and now they must become a new people during the process by which they regain their independence. Okay, end quote. Back to Sanyika. Let's go a bit into this. Those who are calling themselves African Americans are really doing so for 2 reasons. First, of course, there is an implicit overstanding that runs thoroughly through the new African nation that we are not really Americans, that we are, in fact, a people/nation unto ourselves. This used to be widely overstood with little notion of anything to the contrary. Neocolonialism has worked obsessively to change this awareness. The rapid decolonization or desegregation of the nation, beginning in the late 1950s, ushered in a new, or neo, more thorough, and dare I say, revolutionary form of control and exploitation, neocolonialism. Blacks, that's in quotes, took over from Negroes, in quotes, to lead the masses into an integrated lockstep with capitalism, while they, the misleaders, were awarded nominal posts in local and regional government, because the bourgeois media postulated these class enemies as being successful in a new and improved America. It fostered an image crafted by Madison Avenue that anybody could make it. Now that segregation is over, you can grow up to be anything you want, except free, of course. Let me stop here real quick. I want to say a couple of things about this. No, I don't. That'll take too long. It'll take away from the text. I'll save it for later. All right. The more integration, which was supposed to mean freedom and equality, we got, the worse our predicament became. The more bourgeois freedom and equality we struggled to obtain, the more critical our existence became. The stronger the black bourgeoisie got, compounded 100 times by the U.S. ruling class. Excuse me. Let me try that again. The more bourgeois freedom and equality we struggled to obtain, the more critical our existence became. The stronger the black bourgeoisie got, compounded 100 times by the U.S. ruling class. The stronger the black bourgeoisie became, the more our revolutionary leadership was attacked, assassinated, imprisoned, or exiled. The more this became so, the worse the hoods got. The worse the hoods got, the more street orgs began to proliferate. Many people use street orgs instead of the word gangs. More dope, more guns, more pigs, more prisons. This is what the losing of a sense of self brings. Integration is neocolonialism and its reactionary nationalism. But it would be unfair to say it's not progress. It is progress. It's just not progress in our interest. We are moving forward, but it is towards our annihilation. The black bourgeoisie worked in tandem with its masters to keep the chains on New Africa. They overstood the strong nationalist sentiment that ran through the nation. So in order to placate this sentiment and please their masters, the black bourgeoisie introduced the term African American, a split personality that straddled an ocean and a colonial existence. But because our leaders said it was right, and after all, the masses said, We are Africans, voila. This, of course, is not scientific or a reflection of any true reality. It is a term used to maintain a colonial relationship with New Africa, now being run by remote control through the antics and colorful animation of the African American bourgeoisie, what we here at Black Liberation Media and, of course, Black Agenda Report lovingly refer to as the Black Misleadership class. You see them in the Congressional Black Caucus, the higher echelons of the Prince Hall Masons, in the persons of Oprah, Jesse, Al Sharpton, Robert Johnson, etc. They've been appointed by the U.S. ruling class to lead the masses into a neo-colonial marriage with America. The African American bourgeoisie is conjoined, face to ass, those are his words, not mine, with the U.S. ruling class, and no surgery short of protracted people's war will loosen them and free us. The masses, by and large, are innocently confused. They can be redeemed. It is our job as cadres to do that, which is why it is so important to study and struggle. To build up your revolutionary ideological, philosophical, and theoretical overstanding so as to be able to distinguish the real from the false, the righteous from the reactionary. Our vision must be emphasized. I'm sorry. This is a quote he's going into now. Again, I don't have access to the footnotes. I could assume this is from Yaki or Atibashana. I will not, though. I'm just letting you know it is a quote. Our vision must be emphasized in opposition to the imperialist and neo-colonialist perspectives. Our vision demands that we stress the need to establish new African state power as the prerequisite for the long-term resolution of colonial violence, bad housing, miseducation, poor health, no jobs, etc. At present, the orientation underlying mass struggle is primarily neo-colonialist. We ask the U.S. government to do things for us. Our struggle is against the U.S. government to secure the power to prevent it from doing things to us, and so that we can do things for ourselves under our own government. Each issue that the masses struggle around must be infused by the People's Vanguard with the idea that none of our problems can be solved until we achieve national independence, end quote. In closing, then, I'd like to simply emphasize the need to study and struggle. Study revolutionary nationalism and struggle around the issues that are affecting us. It's a beautiful thing to see more prisoners becoming conscious of themselves as new Africans. This, too, is a prerequisite to getting free. Change your mind, and you can change your conditions. Understanding and appreciating the reality of one's situation gives one a greater sense of appreciation for other oppressed nationals in the same or similar predicaments. I'm going to fall out with a quote by Comrade Yaki that pretty much sums it all up. Quote, anyone claiming to attack racism while claiming that racism is the only thing wrong with this system is either terribly confused or an outright enemy of the people and their interests. If we truly want to get rid of racism, we have to overthrow capitalism first. That is the end of chapter 1 of Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. I'm going to come back over here because I'm reading it on a different screen. So I'm over here now in the chat with y'all to see how y'all doing. And real quick, I'm going to take a break from reading. And I want to talk about this term, African American. I want to talk about it from my standpoint. So back in the day, I was the assistant editor of a black newspaper here in Los Angeles, California. Most of the black newspapers in this country are members of NNPA, the National Newspaper Publishers Association. And as such, many of them, not all, but a lot of them as newspapers, as print media, they adhere to the Associated Press style book in the way that they write the news. The way that the news is, now I know we in a literacy crisis here in the US. Y'all just work with me. I'm trying to give you background and context. The way that newspapers are written, it's supposed to be easily digestible on a either 8th or 6th or even 4th grade level, some of them. But it's different from the way you hear news written, at least it used to be, on television and on radio when people are presenting the news. So there's an Associated Press style guide. In that Associated Press style guide, the word black used for black people was always lowercase. Always lowercase. So if you saw Black American or Black people, it was always lowercase. How do I know? Because I would capitalize it in my writing, and my editor, who was a graduate of journalism school, would lowercase it. And when I tried to struggle with them, I said, well, that's not part of the style guide. Now, you know, a lot of newspapers also have their own internal style guide. This newspaper did not. And so since they were committed to following the Associated Press style guide, mind you, Associated Press refused to ever call Muhammad Ali. They always called him Cassius Clay. But I digress. That's prior to my tenure. What I began to do was use the words African American because I wanted capitalization for my people in the paper. Now, full disclosure, I did not struggle with them around New African because I knew if they wasn't going to capitalize B, there was no way they were going to accept New African. This was years ago, mind you. But I'm being transparent is that I didn't even take the struggle to them because I knew it wasn't going to go anywhere. So for me, African American was capitalized, and it also showed that link to Africa, even though you could basically call that split personality, which is what Sanyika was just talking about. But that is the reason why I did that. And so coming fast forward to where we are now today, this whole watching this diaspora war play out and the absolute disdain for African American in order to identify as Black American, it is absolutely horrifying. When Sanyika talks about this conjoining from face to ass of this attempt to call ourselves Black American, the conjoining to this imperialist state, the United States of America. He said this in 2013. It is horrifying to me, the disdain that these, ADOS, FBA, which is trash. I can't say ADOS and FBA, which are trash, without saying they're trash. It is horrifying at how they have gone overdrive in their disdain of Africa, of anything African, and in their love and tethering to America or the United States. It is wild to me. And I can understand Sanyika to a certain extent checking out of here. I'm like, what? Oh my God. Anyway, so that I'm seeing African American didn't necessarily come out of an NAACP meeting. African people, black people, African people here in the U.S., we've called ourselves Ethiopian. We've called ourselves Bilalian. We called ourselves African right after slavery and during enslavement. As a matter of fact, when you look at the founding of the African Methodist Episcopal Church with Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, so we've been using African interchangeably with who we are here. But Lord have mercy, Jesus. So I'm going over here. You know what? Y'all have fun over here in the chat. I am not. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get to all of this. Y'all have fun. Y'all have fun with one another. I'm gonna have to. I don't know how this is gonna work. Maybe I'll be able to come back later on. All right. So, as I said, that was chapter 1. It is 5:51. I'm going to see how much further I can get into chapter 2 of Stand Up, Struggle Forward. And then hopefully we can go on to the first chapter of Before the War by Safiya Bukhari. Chapter 2, Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Again, this was written in 2013. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here, i.e., that was April 1992, y'all. We should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie. Now, he ain't had to do that. Why you got to say he was dressed non-threatening? All right. How his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. Okay, now you just clowning, brother. All right. How his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. And I don't know how many of y'all are of a certain age where you were not alive at the time of the video of the beating or of the rebellion or of that press conference. Of course, you can search now and find the videos of it. But yes, Rodney King was trotted out and he looked completely distraught at what was happening. And he asked the question, can't we all just get along? If you've ever heard that saying, that is where that comes from. Rodney King asking, can't we all just get along? And of course, the majority of us resoundingly answered him, no, we cannot. Anyway, getting back to the text, that, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios, is it barrio or barrio? Anyway, it's usually spelled with a V and pronounced with a B, I think. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anyone had caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that hoods have gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal intra-class combat for much less than that. Though, because of a general colonial mentality, which prevents the challenging of from bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systematic way, wage war on the pigs or for freedom, land, and socialism. Going to take a quick break before I reread that because it seemed like my vocal cords is dry. Took a quick swig of orange juice, no gin, just juice. I'm going to say that again. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that hoods have gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal interclass combat for much less than that. Though, because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of from bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces, i.e. street organizations, i.e. gangs, will not in any systematic way wage war on the pigs or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone and of his own accord would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpered request, can't we all just get along? The fact of the matter was that we were getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos were getting along just fine. I'm not really sure about that, but okay. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist doll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interest and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him and by extension us. Let me stop here. Sanyika Shakur, Kody Scott, formerly known as Monster Kody. Yes, he died as Monster Kody, kind of, sort of. He died as Monster Kody-ish. He was struggling with a lot. Monster Kody, Sanyika, basically dropped out of school in the 6th grade. He and I went to the same elementary school. He was 12 years old, or 11 going on 12, when he dropped out of school. Did not have a diploma, did not have a GED. He stopped going to school because he was in the gang life, and it was in prison where he re-educated himself. If you read the Autobiography of Malcolm X, then you know he talked about reading the dictionary A to Z. If you have looked at the history of the Black Panther Party, then you know their first recruit, if not one of their first recruits, little Bobby Hutton, it was said that he could not read or write, and he learned to read utilizing the Black Panther Party newspaper. When I read the writing of Sanyika Shakur, I'm like, this right here is my brother. This is the result, or this is the end result. This brother did not graduate. I mean, he graduated. See, he has a 6th grade education through the system, but through self-study, this is what he has produced. All right, let me hush and keep it moving. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments, and violently forced into Euro-American his story. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. Okay. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, and some open and hostile. But all of these have been to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neo-colonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is, the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we will remain a minority within the American system, as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e., colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president, and absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are a part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. I'm here. I'm just checking my phone real quick. Checking my phone. Okay. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeoisie is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Johnson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well read, have traveled, and are experienced. They have just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it is played out. It is a superficial overstanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people, nation, or a state government. We are not a free, self-determining people. We were, before contact, kidnapping, and national oppression, but not now. Until this fundamental contradiction is resolved, until New Africa is independent of U.S. imperialism and neo-colonial domination, we will remain at the continual mercy of our historical enemies and their warped worldview, a worldview that breeds, promotes, encourages and finances predation and exploitation. Which brings us back to Rodney King and can't we all just get along? The question that begs an answer is, who is this we he spoke of? The rebellion was against what was generally perceived as the system, and particularly against exploiters who parasitically attached themselves to our oppression, chose to bleed our communities of the little finances we were able to have. The masses, in their choice of targets, were only reappropriating the wealth they'd invested in these stores and businesses that were then taking that wealth out of the hoods and barrios and giving it to the enemies of us all. So we, the poor and exploited, were already getting along with each other. Who we didn't get along with were those who'd exploited us, who bled our areas dry of finances while flooding our areas with a bunch of crap and BS. Real quick, again, if you weren't there, i.e., if you weren't alive during that time, April of 1992, you can find the videos because now it's a digital world. Ain't nothing hidden just about no more. When you look at the videos and when you see people who were on the ground talking about what happened that day or during that time period, you see a lot of Mexicanos, or what is known as Latinos, were in the street. They was ripping stuff up and they was carting stuff off. Some of those that had been targeted may have been or were Korean businesses. Black folks started it, set it off. Black folks was out there, but there was a lot of Mexicans out in the streets too. And we use the word Mexican, but the reality here in Los Angeles, we don't say Hispanic because Richard Nixon came up with that term. One of the reasons why we use the term Latino is because not all of these Spanish-speaking Indian descended people are from Mexico. Some of them are from El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, etc. So Latinos is an over-encompassing term. The Mexicanos or Chicanos, those of Mexican descent born here in the U.S., that's a very specific term. My point being, it was a lot of them Spanish-speaking Indian descended folks out there in the streets during the 92 rebellion. Why is that? It's because they felt it too. They understood it too. It could be because they're more numerous. Latinos are more numerous. They be catching hell and getting murdered by the police like we do. I think probably we're just louder about it. They're more numerous. You see what ICE is doing right now? That's what they usually experience from LAPD. So LAPD has been given a reprieve, has been given a break. They're on vacation now because ICE is handling it for them. These folks was in the streets also. So yeah, back to the question of can we all get along? Who is we? Who was Rodney talking about? Anyway, who we didn't get along with were those who'd exploited us, who'd bled our areas dry of finances while flooding our areas with a bunch of crap and BS. It wasn't the Crips, Bloods, or Sureños. Sureños means the Mexicanos, Latinos, Norteños would be those of Northern California. It wasn't the Crips, Bloods, or Sureños who'd pulled Rodney King out of his car and beat the hell out of him, nor was it the Black Liberation Army or the Brown Berets. So why was his press conference directed at us in the hoods and barrios? This also alerted us to who it was who had arranged this press conference. The next question in line with his request is, what exactly did he mean by get along? As in, can we all get along? Didn't our getting along with national oppression lead us to this point? Didn't we just get along after they kidnapped us, colonized us, hung us, neo-colonized us, imprisoned us, ghettoized us, miseducated us, unemployed us, assassinated our leaders, drugged us, infected us, and sent our youth to fight other oppressed peoples for them? Didn't we get along during all that? Getting along with U.S. imperialism and our own genocide has gotten us into this sordid ass state. Getting along allowed the pigs to feel comfortable with pulling Rodney King out of his car and beating the hell out of him. The pigs didn't fear reprisal from the Black Liberation Army for harming one of our nationals, because when they imprisoned our combatants, we just got along with that. Reread that. Getting along allowed the pigs to feel comfortable with pulling Rodney King out of his car and beating the hell out of him. The pigs didn't fear reprisal from the Black Liberation Army for harming one of our nationals, because when they imprisoned our combatants, we just got along with that. But you see, here's the thing. Those were not Rodney King's words nor his thoughts. Probably not even his will. No, those who were pulling his vocal cords were those who had a vested interest, a stake in the system, as it was before the rebellion. Those who had made a political and economic class alliance with the imperialists. His now famous quote was actually a message from our class enemies by way of someone who they thought we could identify with. But of course, his/their words fell upon deaf ears, because those who'd been treated just as bad, and some even worse, were out in the streets looking for a better day. All the things people labored so hard to manufacture at minimum wage jobs but could not afford to buy, they got for free. People were getting food, clothing, diapers, shoes. The media always focused on the TVs. And whatever else they could never afford but always needed. And this in an empire whose wealth began upon their conquest and continues upon their exploitation today. Let us not forget that the U.S. as an empire has never supported itself, ever. It was born a parasite and grew to prominence as a parasite. It is today a parasite. But in the wealthiest empire on the planet, in the history of the world, people are starving, homeless, and generally without. The repression required to keep us just getting along is a massive effort undertaken by every branch of the oppressor government, executive, legislative, and judiciary. In fact, laws are enacted to maintain bourgeois hegemony over both internal and external colonies. Both federal, i.e. national, and state, i.e. regional, laws function to keep the oppressed tethered to the floor of the empire. There is a general and permanent state of war that governs all relations between oppressor and oppressed. Sometimes it's hidden and tactically called something else. Usually, y'all hold on for me 1 second. Hold on for me for 1 second, please. Yeah, that's not going to work. You know what, y'all? Hold on. I'm going to need to take a quick break. Hold 1 second. Be right back. All right. Alrighty, Teddy. Sorry about that. We keep it real grassroots up here. I try to be professional and polished. It don't always work that way. All right, where was I? There is a general and permanent state of war that governs all relations between oppressor and oppressed. Sometimes it's hidden and tactically called something else, usually something with a benign name that sounds well-meaning, like war on poverty or war on drugs or war on gangs. They militarize everything having to do with relations between oppressed and oppressor nations. It's all part and parcel of the general and permanent state of war between us and them. I'm here, hold on. And just because we ain't ready, organized, and responding to it, don't mean it's not a war. Mario Badele, first president of the Republic of New Africa, used to say, "You might not be at war, but you are in a war." The hoods, barrios, and reservations are virtual prisons. The schools are halfway houses, and the prison industrial complex is doing big business. It's a war, all right, ready or not. A permanent state of war, by the way, psychological warfare is warfare. A permanent state of war must exist in order to maintain fear in and control over the internal colonies. This permanent state of war is called colonialism. When they allow someone who looks like you to govern you for them, this is called neo or new colonialism. And when they let a black, in quotation marks, run the business, as in rock bottom being president of the US, that was Sanyika's term for Barack Obama, rock bottom. This is called post-neocolonialism. But colonialism, all the same. The system is capable of morphing at a moment's notice in order to survive and continue to oppress. As Butch Lee pointed out, quote, it can even appear as its opposite in order to evade destruction, unquote. The slogan popularized by the old Black liberation movement, by any means necessary, actually embodies what the US system of capitalism is really about. In practice, always, they will select a black sock puppet to be the president to demonstrate to their investors that they are colorblind, and then turn right around and imprison 800,000 new Africans. Then the sock puppet president turns around and appoints various women to his team to show the people it is not patriarchal, but the same system is waging an authoritarian war on women and children, though especially women and children of color, those from the internal colonies, New Africa, Puerto Rico, Aslan, and indigenous nations. And of course, we have to contend with the loyal enemies of the empire. These are the ones who go hooping and hollering about racism and discrimination, boo-hooing about how exclusionary the system is. And yet, they really only want in. They want equality, to be equal with the very ones they claim are racist. They use terms like our government or our troops in Afghanistan, our police force. They are clamoring against discrimination because they feel they too should be allowed to prey on people. They want to be equal in the system of capitalism. They don't want to stop the problem. They want to be a part of it. Why else would they ask for equality without calling into question the entire grotesque apparatus? Looking at you, ADOS and FBA, which is trash. This is what makes the petty bourgeois class of blacks so dangerous. They have the resources, approval, and backing of the imperialists to carry on their campaigns of accepted forms of protest, even when they appear to question the bourgeois laws of the enemy. For instance, they'll support both a new trial and the release of Mumia Abu-Jamal only because we can prove that he was wrongly convicted as a part of a frame-up. And while we go on to link this frame-up with a total array of colonial maneuvers carried out to keep New Africa oppressed and exploited, they'll pull back at racism and ignore our need for self-determination. This because their class interests reach an end at calling into question the fundamental contradiction. We can demonstrate this by the fact that there is no support for Sundiata Acoli, Jalil Muntakim, Sekou Odinga, or any other new African prisoners of war. Anything that points to the challenging of the fundamental contradiction that calls into question the actual national oppression of New Africa, the petty bourgeoisie will ignore, reject, or outright deny support for. This would not be in accord with their class interests as parasites upon our misery, their collaboration with our oppressors. So within the framework of their accepted forms of protest as loyal enemies, as Oppo Sames, they can call Mumia's capture, incarceration, and conviction racist, discriminatory, and questionable. But that's where it will end. Those are the parameters. That's the function of this class, to appear as staunch defenders of Black or African American rights, progress, and equality only within the boundaries of established imperial rule, which to say only as citizens of the oppressor nation, as minorities needing special handling, victims. Now, if you are a regular viewer of either Black liberation media or left media in general, you know who Ajamu Baraka is. Ajamu Baraka is currently one of the founders and leaders of the Black Alliance for Peace. Prior to that, in one of his other lives, he was the director in Atlanta, the southeastern region, I do believe, of Amnesty International. And Amnesty International has existed for years as one of those people of conscience nonprofits, non-governmental organizations. And what Amnesty International would do, I haven't heard from them in a while, but one of the things they would do is they would advocate for prisoners of conscience, nonviolent political prisoners to be released from prison. But one of the things that they would do is that they would never take up a cause in the country that they were based in. In other words, Amnesty International, based in South Africa, which I doubt, I'd have to check the record, during the time of apartheid, let's say, for example, the South African chapter could not say, hey, Nelson Mandela needs to be released. But a chapter in France or England or someplace else could say Nelson Mandela needs to be released. So here in the US, it wasn't until, and I'm not saying that Ajamu was behind this, he probably was. I don't remember the foundings. I just remember it was during his tenure in the Southeast that Amnesty International began to talk more about Geronimo Gijaga Pratt, Leonard Peltier. I'm not really sure if they did about Mumia Abu Jamal, but they promoted the cases of Geronimo and Leonard as political prisoners because it was just so glaring, the inconsistencies in their cases, and that they were, quote unquote, innocent. But they never ever, as Sanyika has mentioned here, never ever talked about Assata Shakur, never ever talked about Sundiata Acoli, never ever talked about Jalil Muntakim, never ever talked about Sekou Odinga, Mutulu Shakur. Why? Because these people, in their language, had been accused of crimes that involved of them using violence, right? But when we look at the words of Sanyika, we see these are clearly people who are in staunch opposition to the U.S. imperialist state, which include, by any means necessary, the taking up of arms against the U.S. imperialist state. And that is why they never would, and when I say they, not just in Amnesty International, but the bourgeoisie and the U.S. government, they never would, never have, never will raise these cases, because these are the folks, that's why they're considered prisoners of war. They took up arms against those who hold our people in colonial bondage. Okay, that's enough of me running my mouth. And let me get back to Sanyika's words. The last thing that he said. Okay, I'm sorry. This is not happening. Why is this? Okay, for some reason, y'all, I told you. Oh, okay, there it is. There it is. There it is. I told you it ain't a show. All right, let me go back and read that last paragraph. No, that's not it. Okay, there we go. There we go. That is, so within the framework of their accepted forms of protest as loyal enemies, they can call Mumia's capture, incarceration, and conviction racist, discriminatory, and questionable. But that's where it will end. Those are the parameters. That's the function of this class, to appear as staunch defenders of Black or African American rights, progress, and equality, only within the boundaries of established imperial rule, which is to say, only as citizens of the oppressor nation, as minorities needing special handling, victims. And here we are back at Rodney King. Once the spontaneous LA rebellion had run its course, brought under control only secondarily by the National Guard, its primary weakness, of course, was its spontaneity. I think it's Frantz Fanon who talks about spontaneity. No? The U.S. government enacted a counterinsurgency policy called Weed and Seed. This directive was issued straight from the White House from then President George H.W. Bush. And let us not forget that this same pig had, from January 1976 to 1977, been director of the Central Intelligence Agency. So he was no stranger to counterinsurgency programs. Weed and Seed was a counterinsurgency program, much like the Phoenix program, run previously on the Vietnamese people, to, it explicitly said, neutralize the Viet Cong by assassinating its cadres, destroying its bases among its people, and strategically winning over the Vietnamese population. That is exactly what Weed and Seed was about as well, in the hoods and barrios of South Central. Once you see New Africans as an internal colonized nation, and not simply as a Black minority of discriminated against U.S. citizens, you'll begin to understand the interchangeability of military tactics used against other colonies around the world. Not only did Weed and Seed implement a weeding out of troublemakers, i.e. combatants, leaders, and political adversaries, but it seeded points of contention and distrust amongst the various participants in the rebellion and resistance that grew eventually into what's happening now between almost every hood and barrio. These conflicts did not fall from the sky. Their origins are on earth, issuing from designs that serve someone's needs. The idea is to follow the conflicts to the point of interest, which is to say, who is benefiting from the conflicts? Keep the term Weed and Seed in mind as we go forward here. Now I'm going to stop. It is 6:29 p.m. and we are in chapter 2, and we still have at least, let's see, well, we actually only have one more page. We only have one more page, so I wanted to give as much time as possible to Safiya Bukhari also. So technically speaking, supposed to end at 7:30, 1 hour left. But, for those of you who are watching live, if you have to jump off because it's being recorded and will be housed at Black Liberation Media, you can always come back later. And, folks who weren't able to watch it live, they'll be able to watch it at their leisure. So I'm going to finish this chapter 2 of Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur take a quick breather, swig a little bit more juice, no gin, and then we're going to get into at least 2 chapters, I hope, of Safiya Bukhari's The War Before. Okay. Nationals of 2 oppressed and colonized nations, Aztlan, which is what La Raza or the Mexicanos call this portion of Mexico. Y'all do know that Mexico was stolen by the United States, right? Of course you do. Nationals of 2 oppressed and colonized nations, Aztlan and New Africa, are involved in shooting wars. Yes, these conflicts largely involve lumpen criminal elements. Those involved in street org activity. The lumpen element, to a degree, played some significant roles in the revolution of the 60s and early 70s, especially those who were able to transform their criminal mentalities into conscious revolutionary mentalities. Even though it's largely lumpen elements in contention in the hoods, barrios, regular working class people, students, and children are also being affected by these clashes. But the thing is, the combatants are nationals of oppressed nations, those the U.S. government has already deemed social dynamite and has slated for liquidation through one of its various methods of collective death and destruction. So once the enemy culture saw the mass unity during the rebellion, measures through weed and seed were undertaken to divide so as to be in a better position to conquer these elements who obviously had no qualms about rebelling against oppression. Here's one of the tactics they used. On Florence and Normandy Avenues, excuse me, Florence and Normandy here in South Los Angeles is in a neighborhood that is known. Okay, keep it real. Keep it. What did Malcolm say? Make it plain. Make it plain. Florence and Normandy is A-Tray gangsterhood. That's a set of the Crips. Monster Kody, Sanyika Shakur was an A-Tray gangster. If you read his book Monster, you'll see where he at one point broke into this little shop called Art's Chili Dogs. Art's Chili Dogs sits on Florence a few feet from Normandy. So it is right there in that particular hood. Here's one of the tactics they used. On Florence and Normandy Avenues, the acknowledged point of origin of the rebellion, New Africans were shown on film pulling a Mexicano priest from his car, yanking his pants down while he was on the ground, and spray painting his private parts black. This was not what actually was reported to be. While this priest was in fact Mexicano, he'd been pointed out by a Mexicano as a child molester and was thus disciplined by the first group that got to him. But because those who got him were New African and he was obviously a Mexicano and no sound was attached to the video, the media was allowed to misinterpret the scene as they wished. As I said, if you weren't around, through no fault of your own because you wasn't born, if you wasn't around in 92, you can go find the videos. Yes, they pulled his pants down and spray painted his genitals black. That is what they did. And here you have this report from someone in that area, from that area, with ties, with contacts in that area, telling you what happened. And this is what they did. So there was Reginald Denny laid out after being pulled from his truck. And yes, this is a true story because Nana Jomfy, who should also not be a stranger to Black liberation media, Nana Jomfy is a sister who is currently the executive director of Black Alliance for Just Immigration. Nana Jomfy is an attorney. She went to Cornell under James Turner. Nana Jomfy is one of the attorneys with human rights advocacy, a member of the National Conference of Black Lawyers, Nana Jomfy and Chokwe Lumumba worked on the cases of what were known as the LA four brothers who were arrested and charged with that beating of Reginald Denny, the truck driver who was pulled out during the rebellion. Again, if you look at the video, you can see what's happening. And this is what they did. So there was Reginald Denny laid out after being pulled from his truck after he'd yelled, "Get your black asses out of the street," to the rebels, and then beaten. And across the street was the Mexicano priest, pants pulled down, private parts painted black, and the rebels were seemingly targeting anyone who was a new African as they passed. This is what it looked like from the helicopter, and after the news people interpreted it as such. But that wasn't true. The rebels, the lumpen, had just had a very physical brawl with a few dozen LAPD pigs, and he's specifically talking about members of the H-race, over their manhandling of a fellow by the name of Mark. During the rebels' battle to free Mark from the pigs' clutches, a radio call came out which instructed the pigs to retreat, to leave the area. They got into their cars and left. Then the rebels walked up to Florence Avenue and were attempting to secure the intersection from all vehicle traffic. That is, all vehicle traffic. Any motorist that attempted to pass had their vehicles bombarded with stones, sticks, and bottles. The tactic was to secure the intersection against the eventual return of the LAPD, which, it must be added, has its 77th Division, a notoriously aggressive and hostile police station, right down the avenue of Florence at Broadway. So the idea on a purely spur-of-the-moment level was to secure the main intersection from any and all flowing traffic. What is interesting to note is that the young rebels in lumpen weren't trying to start the LA rebellion, and it certainly wasn't about the Rodney King beating averted, though we'd all seen that too, where earlier in that fateful day, the 4 LAPD pigs were acquitted after a trial for the tape beating. While it most definitely wasn't the central factor, it was, however, one more nail in the coffin of belief in the system. Thus, if only for a few days, while rebels reappropriated various goods and demolished certain structures they knew were used to exploit and extract wealth out of the area, local mom and pop shops were not destroyed or looted. However, by showing over and over the corner of Florence and Normandy, Reginald Denny's stoning, the priest's painting, and the chaotic attempts by the rebels and lumpens to secure the corner, the impression of madness and racism was projected out into the city, region, state, and empire. And of course, like most things involving a challenge to capital, exploitation, and private property, the state's propaganda machine put its own spin on these events, with a few agents on the ground in key places doing whisper campaigns. It wasn't too hard to convince right-wing street and prison organizations that it was the racist blacks attacking Mexicans. Thus began the acrimonious flow of orders to get even that issued from the tombs of the SHU units, secure housing units in the California prison systems. Check the stats. After the 92 rebellion, the hoods and barrios across LA, Watts, Compton, and Linwood erupted in lethal clashes that have culminated in the hostile standoff that exists today. In the midst of the rebellion, nevertheless, there came a ceasefire order observed by some of the most dangerous and combative street orgs in American communities. 80% of the sets complied with the ceasefire. Bitter enemies blended across color lines in South Central Watts and Compton. This was in the historic spirit of the 1965 Watts Rebellion that saw a ceasefire and blending of the older New African street orgs in favor of united action against the LAPD and National Guard. Weed and Seed was intended to prevent this from happening again. 6:39 p.m. Once the street orgs agreed upon a ceasefire in 1965, they, unlike the Crips and Bloods of 92, had a social movement to join as an alternative. A social movement that was increasingly becoming an armed revolution. Malcolm had been murdered earlier that year in February. The Revolutionary Action Movement, RAM, was active and nightly on the bourgeois news. Images of civil rights protests were being shown. There existed a more obvious exposure of the fundamental contradiction. New Africa was being rapidly decolonized. The system of capitalism was morphing again, searching for new ways to maintain its control over the internal colonies while simultaneously struggling to get new colonies in Vietnam, South America, and Africa. The following year in October, the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense would start, as would the US organization. Most of the street or combatants who'd come together in a ceasefire during the 1965 Watts Rebellion would go on to join either the Panthers or us, a move that wasn't lost on the FBI, who, through its counterintelligence program COINTELPRO, worked tirelessly to exacerbate pre-existing conflicts between individual combatants that inevitably spilled over into gunfights and murders. The same tactics were used against the Crips and Bloods under Weed and Seed after the 92 rebellion. Same war, same objective, different names for the maneuvers. What should come across as evident to us as we reflect on the various tactics used against us over the centuries is that the enemy has more faith in our ability to get free than we do. I'm going to read that one again. What should come across as evident to us as we reflect on the various tactics used against us over the centuries is that the enemy has more faith in our ability to get free than we do. Damn. Put another way, the enemy has had to implement so many ploys to hold, control, exploit, and now to eliminate us that for us to that for us to sit and point these things out makes even the most astute observer appear as a wingnut conspiracy theorist. Though, of course, it's no theory when it's actually happening, as Butch Lee and Jay Sakai have pointed out. It ain't a conspiracy when it's done right, when it's done outright and in the open. It's a strategy. Why else would the imperialists have to implement plan after plan, sometimes elaborate and varied, to contain New Africa or any other colony if, one, it wasn't capable of breaking free, two, it wasn't an asset, and three, it wasn't able to turn its oppression into the actual defeat of the empire itself. Oftentimes, the reaction to an issue can be a lesson unto itself. In this instance, the enemy's reaction to our very existence is quite enough for those paying attention to recognize the vast potential in our collective ability to break the chains. Of course, the fact remains that the chains which bind, that at this stage is psychological, are so thoroughly in place that the masses have to be convinced that they are oppressed. Consciousness will not fall from the sky, nor will people be moved to action by mere thoughts or ideas in anyone's head. On both counts, material, earthbound, tangibles, food, clothing, shelter, land, and control of destiny, socialism, will motivate the masses. People are moved by interests. So in closing, it was never about Rodney King, the verdict, or any singular thing at all. These, however, were accelerants or sparks at any given time. But the basic, most fundamental thing that causes us to struggle, to resist, is that we are not collectively free to determine our own destiny, that we are under the thumb of U.S. imperialism. And this imperialism this imperialism is administered through colonialism, colonial violence, both armed and unarmed. Violence does damage physically or mentally in the streets and in the schools, through police shootings or cultural hegemony. Shout out to what's my brother's name? I forgot his name already. Anyway, the colonialism is in place to exploit us through capitalism. Let's be clear on this, because whether the people are conscious of this or not, it is the reality we are in. And it follows that it will be our recognition, challenge to, and resolution of this fundamental contradiction that will end our national oppression. Without understanding this, we'll continue to be played on America's Ferris wheel of citizenry, dazed and confused, being led by the black bourgeoisie to meekly just get along with our oppression. And that is the end of chapter 2. Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. It is 6:46. That's not too bad. We can at least get into Safiya Bukhari. Don't know if we're going to be able to get into 2 chapters. We're going to see. We're going to see what happens. But now I'm back over here with y'all. How y'all doing? The undefeated chat. Y'all awake? Did I bore you? Was you snoring? Let's see. Ooh, that's a nice quote. This is the education we need 24/7. I know that's right. Listen, don't get me started. I be thinking there's sometimes when my sleep cycle is always off. It'll be 3 a.m. and I'll be wide awake and I'll be like, I should go on Black Liberation Media. Ain't nobody up. Don't get me up here reading to y'all at 4 in the morning. But anyway. Way 24/7, huh? Interesting. Yeah, I don't even know. There ought to be a thing on here to tell me. There ought to be a thing in here to tell me how many comments it is. It's a lot of comments over here. I'm not going to be able to get to everything. I'm not going to be able to get to none of it just about. So let me just still here. We going to listen, doing great. Okay. All right. So again, unfortunately, I won't say I can't. It's just that if I try to put the PDF on the screen, it's going to look crazy. And I don't really want to do that. But I believe it was Chitimacha that said, if you go to Internet Archive, you can see a PDF or an electronic version of The War Before, and you can read along with me. So let me take another swig of orange juice real quick before I get started. Orange juice all hot. Need some ice. Let's see here. The War Before. The true life story of becoming a Black Panther, keeping the faith in prison, and fighting for those left behind. This is by Safiya Bukhari. It was edited and has an introduction by Laura Whitehorn, who is a former political prisoner. It has a foreword by Angela Davis. You all know who she is. And an afterword by Mumia Abu Jamal. You all know who he is. This was published in 2010 by the Feminist Press at the City University of New York. I don't, this might be the blackest, most radical. I'm not trying to dog them. I'm really not. The most blackest, most radical thing the feminist press has ever published. And I believe they were able to do that because Laura Whitehorn, one of Safiya Bukhari's comrades in this struggle, was able to push it through. This is the kind of assistance that folks need. You know, help us with our projects. Of course, Safiya passed away in 2003, so this was published posthumously based on her writings. It needed to be published. Safiya Bukhari, member of the Black Panther Party, part of their part of the information committee of the Black Panther Party, and like many in the late 60s, early 70s, because of the repression and what was also felt to be a need for another direction, many members of the Black Panther Party went underground and joined the Black Liberation Army. Safiya Bukhari was a soldier in the Black Liberation Army, captured in 19. I think she was captured. Assata was captured in May. Safiya was captured. Was it before or after? I think Safiya was captured after. Safiya and her two comrades, Masai Ehihosi and a brother by the name of Kambozi, they were captured later on in 1973. Assata was captured along with Sundiata Kohli. Zaid Malik Shakur was murdered in May of 1973. Safiya Kambozi, they were driving in Virginia and went into a store and were ambushed by the shopkeeper. Kambozi was murdered. Masai was shot. Safiya was arrested at the scene. Masai survived, by the way. So this happened after Assata and Sundiata, but Masai and Safiya were the first combatants to assert during their trials that they were New African combatants, that they were prisoners of war, and the U.S. had no right to try them. So that is one of the reasons why Safiya Bukhari's story, one of the reasons why her story, why her name rings out in the streets. The other, of course, is that she liberated herself from prison, and that once she actually did get out of prison, as the subtitle of her book says, she continued to fight for those left behind, fiercely committed to her comrades in the Black Liberation Army and the Black Panther Party, and to getting them out of prison by any means necessary. Co-founder of the Jericho movement, which still exists to bring awareness of and advocate for the freedom of political prisoners and prisoners of war. So again, this was published in 2010 by the Feminist Press. I do not think that I am going to, no, I'm not. I'm not going to read the introduction, the foreword, the afterword, anything like that. I am going to get right into Safiya's words. Now, this is a quote in the beginning of the book. I don't know if Safiya chose this. I don't know if Laura chose it, but I'm going to read it like as if Safiya chose it. Quote, "And that is why the youth were so important, for they would prove to the ancestors that it had not been foolish to fight for the right to be free, to be human." That is a quote from Tony Cade Bambara from the book The Seabirds Are Still Alive. Now, the first chapter of this book, oh Lord, there's 22 chapters. I don't know if we're going to make it all through August. Sanyika's book is considerably smaller. This first chapter of Safiya's book is called Coming of Age. Hold on a second. Give me a sec. Give me a sec. Give me a sec. Give me several seconds. Give me several seconds. Yeah, give me a few more seconds. Give me 1 minute. 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. So I can say what I need to say about this introduction. I've talked about Safiya before, but I never read from her book here on Black Liberation Media. So, oh my God, it takes forever. Hold on. Okay. All right, it's taking me forever, y'all. Okay, there we go. Let me mention too, real quick, Safiya's book as well as Sanyika's book. He's footnoted everything that he has written. So if you want the footnotes, you got to go deal with the actual book, because I was not able to make it so that I could read to the foot. It would have taken. We'd be here all night if I was going through the footnotes. All right, so let me real quick. All right, chapter 1, Coming of Age, a Black Revolutionary. This actually existed as an essay and pamphlet while Safiya was alive. So this has been out there in the world. Some of her writings, other writings had been out there. I wasn't that familiar with everything. And of course, some things we hadn't seen before, all brought together now and placed here in this book. So again, we are now in chapter 1 of The War Before by Safiya Bukhari, Coming of Age, a Black Revolutionary. Greek mythology tells the story of Minos, ruler of the city of Knossos. That's how I'm pronouncing it. Minos had a great labyrinth or maze in which he kept the Minotaur, a monster that was half man and half bull, whose victims were boys and girls who would make it to the center of the maze only to be killed when they came face to face with the Minotaur. If an intended victim chanced to survive the encounter with the Minotaur, the person perished trying to find a way out of the many intricate passages. Finally, Theseus of Athens, with the help of Ariadne, Minos' daughter, entered the labyrinth, slayed the beast, and found his way out by following the thread he had unwound as he entered. The maturation process is full of obstacles and entanglements for anyone. But for a Black woman in America, it has all the markings of the Minotaur's maze. I had to say that, even though nothing as spectacular takes place in the maturation process of the average Black woman. But the day-to-day struggles for survival and growth reaps the same reward in the end in 10,000 different ways. The trick is to learn from each defeat and become stronger and more determined to ensure the annihilation of the beast. I am one of a family of 10 children. My parents were strict and religious, but proud and independent. One of the strongest influences of my childhood was my mother constantly telling us to hold our heads up and be proud, because we were just as good or better than anyone else, and to stand up and fight for what we believed to be right. There was a lot of competition in my family. You had to be competitive with 10 children, all 2 years apart, growing up, each trying to live up to the other or be better. We were determined not to be caught up in the rut of the ghetto. We were going to get out. So each of us worked on our separate goals, 10 individuals, one family in our separate world. We believed that with the right education, we could make it. So that is the route we took, searching for the American dream. I was going to be a doctor. In my second year of college, I pledged a sorority. It was here that the rose-colored glasses were cracked and rays of reality were allowed to filter in. The sorority had decided to help, quote, disadvantaged children as one of our projects for the year, and we were trying to decide what country to work with when one of the sisters suggested that we work in the ghettos of New York. Personally, I had never even thought of people in the United States being disadvantaged, but only too lazy to work and make it. I was in for one of the biggest rude awakenings of my life. Whenever I read this about Safiya Bukhari, it reminds me of how so many of our people, so many of our fiercest warriors for our liberation began not as lumpen, not as working class, but as middle class, dare I say petty bourgeoisie, who grew up under an illusion. That illusion was shattered, and they dedicated their life to the freeing of our people. A few of us were sent to Harlem to investigate the situation. We talked to people on the street, in the welfare centers, from door to door, and watched them work and play, loiter on the corners and in the bars. What we came away with was a story of humiliation, degradation, deprivation, and waste that started in infancy and lasted until death, in too many cases at an early age. Even at this point, I did not see this as affecting me personally, but only as a sorority project. I was sort of a tourist who takes pity on the less fortunate. The sorority decided to do what we could to help the children. The Black Panther Party was already running a free breakfast program to feed the children. I had a daughter of my own at this point and decided that I would put my energies into this. I could not get into the politics of the Black Panther Party, but I could volunteer to feed some hungry children. You see, children deserve a good start, and you have to feed them for them to live to learn. It's difficult to think of reading and arithmetic when your stomach is growling. I'm not trying to explain the logic of the free breakfast children program, only showing how I had to be slowly awakened to the reality of life and shown the interconnection of things. At 5 a.m. every morning, my daughter and I would get ready and go to the center where I was working on the breakfast program. It entailed cooking and serving breakfast, sometimes talking to the children about problems they were encountering or helping them with their homework. Everything was going along smoothly until the number of children coming began to fall off. Finally, I began to question the children and found that the police had been telling the parents in the neighborhood not to send their children to the program because we were feeding them poisoned food. This is very important. It wasn't no social workers. It wasn't no teachers. It wasn't no government officials. It was the law enforcement arm of the government, the police, who told the parents in the neighborhood that they were feeding them poisoned food. It's one thing to hear about the underhanded things the police do. You can choose to ignore it, but it is totally different to experience it for yourself. You must either lie to yourself or face it. I chose to face it and find out why the police felt it was so important to keep Black children from being fed that they told lies. I went to the Black Panther Party and started attending some of their community political education classes. First encounter with the police. Not long after that, I was forced to make a decision about the direction I was going in politically. I was on 42nd Street with a friend when we noticed a crowd gathered on the corner. In the center of the crowd was a Panther with some newspapers under his arm. 2 police officers were also there. I listened in. The police were telling the Panther that he could not sell newspapers on the corner, and he was insisting that he could. Without a thought, I told the police that the brother had a constitutional right to disseminate political literature anywhere, at which point the police asked for my identification and arrested the sister and myself along with the brother who was selling the papers. I need to take a real quick break, y'all. That's one of the reasons why I'm off the camera, so y'all won't see what I'm doing. No, I'm not putting gin in the juice or rolling nothing up. It's more adjusting myself for comfort. I told y'all Mr. Arthritis be knocking. Okay. I had never been arrested before, and I was naive enough to believe that all you had to do was be honest and everything would work out all right. I was wrong again. As soon as the police got us into the back seat of their car and pulled away from the crowd, the bestiality began to show. My friend went to say something, and one of the police officers threatened to ram his nightstick up her if she opened her mouth again, and then ran on in a monologue about black people. I listened and got angry. At the 14th precinct, they separated us to search us. They made us strip. After the policewoman searched me, one of the male officers told her to make sure she washed her hand so she would not catch anything. That night, I went to see my mother and explained to her about the bust and about a decision I had made. Mom and Daddy were in the kitchen when I got there. Daddy was sitting at the table and Mama was cooking. I told them about the bust. They said nothing. Then I told them about how the police had acted, and they still said nothing. I said I could not sit still and allow the police to get away with that. I had to stand up for my rights as a human being. I remember my mother saying, if you think it's right, then do it. I went back to Harlem and joined the Black Panther Party. I spent the next year working with welfare mothers in liberation schools, talking to students, learning the reality of life in the ghettos of America, and reevaluating many of the things I had been taught about the land of the free and the home of the brave. About this time, I quit school and looked for a full-time job. I had education and skills, but there was always something wrong. What it was only became clear after I went to ITT, International Telephone and Telegraph, to apply for a job as a receptionist clerk. They told me I was overqualified. I ended up working in my friend's mother's beauty parlor and spent all my spare time with the party. Excuse me. By the summer of 1970, I was a full-time party member, and my daughter was staying with my mother. I was teaching some of the political education classes at the party office and had established a liberation school in my section of the community. By listening to the elderly, I learned how they could not survive off their miserly Social Security checks, not pay the rent and eat too. So they would pay their rent and eat from the dog food section of the supermarket or the garbage cans. I had listened to the middle-aged mother as she told of being evicted from her home and how she was sleeping on a subway with her children. She did so because welfare refused to help her unless she signed over all her property. Out of desperation, she fraudulently received welfare. I watched a mother prostitute her body to put food in the mouth of her child, while another mother, mentally broken under the pressure, prostituted her 8-year-old child. That's an interesting choice of words, mentally broken. We remember when we read Malcolm X's autobiography, how he detailed his mother slowly losing her mental independence because of the state and their interference in the family. I had seen enough of the ravages of dope, alcohol, and despair to know that a change was needed to make the world a better place in which my child could live. My mother had successfully kept me ignorant of the plight of Black people in America. Now I had learned it for myself, but I was still to learn a harsher lesson: the plight of the slave who dares to rebel. Turbulent times. The year 1971 saw many turbulent times in the Black Panther Party and changes in my life. I met and worked with many people who were to teach and guide me. Michael Setawayo Tabor of the Panther 21, Albert Noah Washington, and lost one, Robert Webb, who was responsible for my initial political education. Setawayo taught me to deal in a principled fashion. Noah taught me compassion, and Robert taught me to be firm in my convictions. When the split took place in the Black Panther Party, I was left in the position of communications and information officer of the East Coast Black Panther Party. Much later, I was to discover the vulnerability of that position. Many party members went underground to work with the Black Liberation Army. I was among those who elected to remain above ground and supply necessary support. The police murders of youth such as Clifford Glover, Tyrone Guyton, etc., and the BLA's retaliation with the assassination of police officers Piagentini and Jones and Foster and Laurie, well, I think more Laurie than Foster, but anyway, made the powers that be frantic. They pulled out all the stops in their campaign to rid the streets of rebellious slaves. By spring 1973, comrades Assata Shakur and Sundiata Acoli were captured, along with Nuh and Jalil, formerly known as Anthony Bottom. Twyman Myers was on the FBI's 10 most wanted list, and I was still traveling back and forth across the country trying to build necessary support mechanisms. In 1972, I had recognized the need to depend on something other than myself. In less than 2 years, I had come to realize that nothing is permanent or secure in a world in which it is who you know and what you have that counts. I had seen friends and loved ones killed or thrown into prison, associates who I believed would never go back turned state's evidence or melded into the woodwork. Nuh introduced me to Islam, which gave me a new security, sense of purpose, and dignity. By 1973, I was receiving a great deal of flack from the police because of what they suspected I might be doing. Mostly it was because I did not have a record. They could not catch me doing anything, and I had gained the community's support. All the while, I actively and vocally supported BLA members. This section is entitled Capture. So she was captured January 25th, 1975. I thought she had been captured the same year as Assata, 1973. So she was captured after Assata, but was the first to assert, "I'm a prisoner of war and you have no right or jurisdiction to try me." On January 25th, 1975, some other members of the Amistad Collective of the BLA and I went into the country in Virginia to practice night firing. We were to leave Virginia that night on our way to Jackson, Mississippi, because I wanted to be there on Sunday to see someone. Before returning to the crib where we were staying, we decided to stop at a store to pick up cold cuts for sandwiches to avoid stopping at roadside restaurants on the way down. We drove around looking for an open store. When we came to one, I told the brothers to wait in the car and I would go in and be right back. I entered the store, went past the registers, down an aisle to the meat counter, and started checking for all beef products. I heard the door open, saw two of the brothers come in, and did not give it a thought. I went back to what I was doing, but out of the corner of my left eye, I saw the manager's hand with a rifle pointed toward the door. I quickly got into an aisle just as the firing started. Up to this point, no words had been spoken. With the first lull in shooting, Kambozi Amistad, one of my bodyguards and a member of the Amistad Collective, came down the aisle toward me. He was wearing a full-length army coat. It was completely unbuttoned. As he approached, he told me he had been shot. I didn't believe him at first because I saw no blood and his weapon was not drawn. He insisted, so I told him to lie down on the floor and I would take care of it. Masai Ehihosi, my co-defendant, apparently had made it out the door when the firing started because he reappeared at the door trying to draw the fire so we could get out. I saw him get shot in the face and stumble backward out the door. I looked for a way out and realized there was none. I elected to play it low-key to try to get help for Kambozi as soon as possible. That effort was wasted. The manager of the store and his son, Paul Green Sr. and Jr., stomped Kambozi to death in front of my eyes. Later, when I attempted to press countercharges of murder against them, the Commonwealth attorney called it justifiable homicide. 5 minutes after the shootout, the FBI was on the scene. The next morning, they held a press conference in which they said I was notorious, dangerous, etc., and known to law enforcement agencies nationwide. My bail was set at $1 million for each of the 5 counts against me. Trial and imprisonment. On April 16th, 1975, after a trial that lasted 1 day, I was sentenced to 40 years for armed robbery. That night, I arrived here at the Virginia Correctional Center for Women in Goochland. Directly following my trial, I was placed in the maximum security building. There I stayed until the threat of court action led them to release me into the general population. The day after my release to general population, I was told that the first iota of trouble I caused would land me back in the maximum security building, and there I would stay. My emphasis then and for the next 2 years was on getting medical care as well as educational programs and activities for myself and the other women, with the priority being on medical care for myself. Inside the prison, I was denied care. The general feeling was that they could not chance hospitalization for fear I would escape. As such, they preferred to take a chance on my life. The court said they saw no evidence of inadequate medical care, but rather a difference of opinion on treatment between the prison doctor and me. The quality of medical treatment, the quality of, quote, medical treatment for women prisoners in Virginia must be at an all-time low. Their lives are in the hands of a, quote, doctor, unquote, who examines a woman whose right ovary has been removed and tells her there is tenderness in the missing ovary. This, quote, doctor, unquote, examines a woman who has been in prison for 6 months and tells her that she is 6 weeks pregnant and there is nothing wrong with her. She later finds her baby has died and mortified inside of her. Alternatively, he tells you that you are not pregnant, and 3 months later you give birth to a 7-pound baby boy. The list includes prescribing Maalox for a sore throat, and diagnosing a sore throat that turns out to be cancer. In other words, just medical care that just don't give a goddamn. In December 1976, I started hemorrhaging and went to the clinic for help. No help of any consequence was given, so I escaped. She says it so matter-of-factly, just like Asada says in her book. You know what? I just made the decision to leave. Okay. No help of any consequence was given, so I escaped. 2 months later, I was recaptured. While on escape, a doctor had told me that I could endure the situation, take painkillers, or have surgery. I decided to use the lack of medical care as my defense for the escape to accomplish 2 things. 1, expose the level of medical care at the prison, and 2, put pressure on them to give me the care I needed. I finally got to the hospital in June 1978. By then it was too late. I was so messed up inside that everything but one ovary had to go. Because of the negligence of the doctor and the lack of feeling on the part of the prison officials, I was forced to have a hysterectomy. So I met Safiya Bukhari in 1990. I had played phone tag with her in July of 2003. I wanted to interview her for this radio show I was doing. I didn't get back to her. She passed away in August of 2003. So during that time, from 1990 to 2003, I never really sat down and had a talk with Safiya about her life. As I said, I remember reading this at the time. This first chapter of a book had been out there in the world before. And she had even sent me one of the essays she had written about on sexism in the Black Panther Party and asked for my feedback. But I had never again talked with her about her life. It wasn't until I was speaking with Jalil Muntakim here on Black Liberation Media. I don't think it was last year. Must have been sometime in 2024. And he told us, the audience, he told me Safiya had fibroid tumors. And this was in 1976. So I don't know what the world was like for sisters in 1976. I know now, as a woman who has been dealing with fibroids in the last several years, and from seeing online what Black women are saying, how fibroids are so common for Black women. We have them more often than any other group of women. One of the things that can happen when you have fibroid tumors, they're usually non-cancerous, but they just basically are all over your uterus, and they can make intercourse painful. They can interfere with you getting pregnant, and you can bleed heavily on your menstrual cycle. Heavily on your menstrual cycle, to the point where you might need a blood transfusion. I'm not telling you what I read. I'm not telling you what I heard. I'm telling you what Thandisizwe, knows. She says she started hemorrhaging. She started having her menstrual cycle, and it just would not stop. When Jalil told me that, I was like, wow. It's just that I had never known what her medical condition was. She was saying she needed medical care, but I never heard what it was for. And so learning this now in 2024, or 20, I think it was 2024, I can see why that would worry her in 1976. I could see why she would be scared. I could see why she would feel her life was at risk. And being a badass mofo, Black Liberation Army soldier, I can see how she busted out of prison. I would love to say that if I was in prison, I could bust out. I ain't going nowhere. But yeah, sister girl busted up out the prison. All right. Finally got to the hospital in June 1978. By then it was too late. I was so messed up inside that everything but one ovary had to go. Because of the negligence of the quote unquote doctor and the lack of feeling on the part of the prison officials, I was forced to have a hysterectomy. When they brought me back to the prison in March of 1977, because of the escape, they placed me in cell 5 on the segregation end of the maximum security building. The same room they had placed me in on April 16, 1975. Today, I remain in that cell, allegedly because of my escape, but in actuality, because of my politics. How do I know? Since I was returned to this institution on March 24th, 1977, other women have escaped, been brought back, and been released to general population. Yesterday, after 22 months, my co-defendant on the escape charge was okayed for release to general population. I was denied. Despite my emotional and physical setbacks, I have learned a great deal. I have watched the oppressor play a centuries-old game on black people, divide and conquer. Black women break under pressure and sell their men down the river. In 2 strokes, the state does more damage than 30 years in prison could have done if the women had supported the men. Now more than ever before, black women, new African women, have developed a mercenary outlook on life. No longer are they about family, community, and us as a people. They are about looking good, having fun, and making it. Women's liberation is what they are talking about. Genuine women's liberation for black women, however, will only come about with the liberation of black people as a whole. That is, when for the first time since our forefathers were snatched from the African continent and brought to America as slave labor, we can be a family, and from that family build a community and a nation. The powers that be were disconcerted when black mothers, wives, and daughters, and black women in general, stood by and in many cases fought beside their men when they were captured, shot, or victimized by the police and other agents of the government. They were frightened of the potential of black women to wreak havoc when these women began to enter the prisons and jails in efforts to liberate their men. They were spurred into action when they were confronted with the fact that black women were educating their children from the cradle up about the real enemies of black people and about what must be done to eliminate this ever-present threat to the lives of black people. During the last 4 years of my incarceration, I watched and refrained from speaking because I did not want to alienate the left. Black men and women have fooled themselves into believing we were making progress because Patricia Harris, a black woman, joined the president's cabinet and Andrew Young became ambassador to the United Nations. They fail to realize that it is simply politics, American style. There is no real progress being made. Indeed, one of Jimmy Carter's best friends, Vernon Jordan, head of the Urban League, had to concede in his annual economic review, The State of Black America 1979, that the income gap between blacks and whites is actually widening. The sacrifices made by black women in search of black womanhood, like those made by the people of Knossos in attempting to slay the Minotaur, have been many, harsh, and cruel. We too can slay the beast, in our case, American racism, capitalism, and sexism, and out of the ashes build a true and independent black nation in which we can take our rightful places as women, wives, and mothers, knowing that our children will live to be men and women, and our men will be allowed to recognize their manhood, to support and defend their families with dignity, together building a future for ourselves, build to win. Now, this is the afterword to this essay, Coming of Age and Update, January 1981. It has been 2 years since I wrote the original article. Many things have happened. Assata Shakur was liberated. Imari Obadele, former president of the Republic of New Africa, was released. The Ku Klux Klan regrouped and was revamped. 16 black children are missing and presumed to be dead in Atlanta. 8 black men were murdered in Buffalo. Pregnant black women were shot in Chattanooga, and Ronald Reagan takes office in 2 days. It has been 2 months since I was released from the maximum security building after spending a total of 3 years and 7 months. I had to go to court to do it. It too was an eye-opening experience. The reason they were keeping me housed in that building was that I was a, quote, threat to the security of the free world, unquote. What can I say? It seems that the political scene in America has come full circle, and black people are once again the scapegoats for everything that goes wrong in white America. They no longer feel the need to pacify us with poverty programs and token jobs. Sitting in a maximum security cell for 3 years and 7 months, afforded me an opportunity to reflect upon my life and the lessons I was forced to learn. Now the learning process is over. It is time to put what I have learned into practice. Freedom will only be won by the sweat of our brows. It is 7:30. She has a second afterword to this essay. I'm going to read that, and then we're going to take a look at where we at and how we doing. Afterword 2, 13 years later. Yesterday, October 21st, 1994, we buried a close comrade, friend, and brother, Breeze Barrow. Let me stop. I said I first met Safiya Bukhari in 1990. It may have been 1991. It was during the first Gulf War, I believe. Yeah, the first Gulf War. And I met her in San Francisco at an event. She was there, Brother Breeze was there, and Kai Lumumba Barrow, Breeze's partner, was there. Kai Lumumba Barrow has either done the afterword or the forward or the introduction to the book. I think it's called Anarchist Panther. It's due out on August 4th from AK Press. This is a book of writings from Baba Ashanti Alston. Ashanti Alston and Safiya Bukhari were married at one point. I don't think Ashanti, he may have been locked up. I don't think Ashanti came to San Francisco. But at any rate, I met Breeze, Kai, and Safiya all at the same time back in 1990. And Ashanti talks all the time very glowingly, very lovingly, very honorably about Safiya and what she has meant to the comrades behind the wall and about the struggles. So we'll get into some more of that a little bit as we go further in her book. So yesterday, October 21st, 1994, we buried a close comrade, friend, and brother, Breeze Barrow. Less than 2 weeks ago, we buried another close comrade, friend, mentor, and father figure, Nathaniel Shanks. Both of these brothers were strong Panthers and had been on the streets holding the line, maintaining the stand, while we had been locked down in the dungeons of this country. Reverberating through my mind for years has been the incantation of Che Guevara. Wherever death may surprise us, it will be welcome as long as this, our battle cry, reaches some receptive ear and new hands reach out to intone our funeral dirge with the staccato of machine gun fire and new cries of battle and victory. Today, this minute, this hour, as Malcolm would say, I've come to realize that picking up the gun is the easy part. The difficult part is the day-to-day organizing, educating, and showing the people by example what needs to be done to create a new society. The hard, painstaking work of changing ourselves into new beings, of loving ourselves and our people, and working with them daily to create a new reality. This is the first revolution, that internal revolution. I'm coming to understand what they meant when they sang the words, "The race is not given to the swift, nor is it given to the strong, but to him that endures to the end," and what was meant by the fable of the hare and the tortoise. Some people declare themselves to be revolutionaries, members of one organization or another, i.e., I was one of the first Panthers, or I used to be a Panther. They only come out when there's a major celebration where Panthers are on display and live off their former glory, not understanding that it's not about what you used to be, but what you are doing now. What are you doing now? They ran a quick race, using all for the moment, grew tired, and gave up. It may take a little longer to do it the hard way, slowly and methodically, building a movement step by step and block by block, but doing it this way is designed to build a strong foundation that will withstand the test of time and the attack of the enemy. If we truly are to create a new society, we must build a strong foundation. If we are truly to have a new society, we must develop a mechanism to struggle from one generation to the next. If we truly are to maintain our new society after we have won the battle and claimed the victory, we must instill into the hearts and minds of our children, our people, ourselves, this ability to struggle on all fronts, internally and externally, laying a foundation built upon a love for ourselves and a knowledge of the sacrifices that went before and all we have endured. There is much to be done to achieve this. There is a long road ahead of us. Let's do it. Now, there's another afterword in here with a quick note. It says afterword 3, 2002, but I'm checking in with y'all. So it's only 7:35. Damn, 35 minutes. Okay, let me go on back over here. Look, I think y'all still in here. Let me go on back over here and finish reading. Afterward 3, 2002. It doesn't say Laura Whitehorn at the end, but I'm going to make the assumption that Laura Whitehorn, the editor, wrote this. Safiya originally wrote this third afterword as an introduction to coming of age in the journal Social Science. In early 2002, Joy James, then professor in the Department of Africana Studies at Brown, and others organized a conference at Brown University titled Imprisoned Intellectuals, a dialogue with scholars, activists, and former U.S. political prisoners on war, dissent, and social justice. Joy James is another name that should be familiar to folks at Black Liberation Media. The invited speakers were asked to submit a version of their remarks for inclusion in a journal. Safiya spoke at the conference and submitted the essay, Coming of Age, a Black Revolutionary, with this new introduction. Many 60s radicals distrusted an overemphasis on theory, which we saw as an excuse for inaction by radical generations before our own. In this short piece, Safiya sums up her ambivalence about the project of writing, which she began while in prison. Her conclusion that we must write our own history provides the impetus for the collection of her writings and speeches. Now, I need y'all to give me. I need y'all to give me one more quick break. Let me adjust for comfort, and then I can get back into reading this piece by Safiya. So give me a minute. Pretty please with sugar or agave on top, whatever it is that may tickle your fancy. Give me a minute. Let's see here. Got a fan on, and no, I will not be editing any of this out. I'm gonna keep it all in. Keeping all the nooks and crannies, all the knocking around, all the distractions, because that too will be part of the historical record. Thandi was always telling us she had arthritis. All right, here we go. Again, this is an introduction written in 2002 for Safiya's essay, Coming of Age, a Black Revolutionary, that was submitted to a journal, and it is being included here in the book as an afterword. The war before as an afterward. At the beginning of this conference, I had problems with accepting the label of being a prison intellectual. Intellectual had always carried the connotation of being a theorist, an armchair revolutionary, if you will. Therefore, the idea of being seen as an intellectual was anathema to me. I love that word. I had always thought of myself as an activist, an on-the-ground worker who practiced rather than preached. This conference forced me to face a reality. I was there because I had spent some time in prison writing and thinking, thinking and writing, trying to put on paper some cogent ideas that might enable others to understand why I did some of the things that I had done and the process that had brought us to the point we were at. I had also come to the conclusion that if we didn't write the truth of what we had done and believed, someone else would write his or her version of the truth. If we can't write / draw a blueprint of what we were doing while we were doing it or before we do it, then we must at least write our history and point out the truth of what we did, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now, let's see. She's got several notes in here, several notes at the end of this chapter that I will not go into. I'm not going to go into the notes. Y'all just going to have to get the book and read it yourself. So now it is 7:40 p.m. Los Angeles time. That means it's 10:40 for y'all on the East Coast. How y'all doing? How are y'all doing? It looks like y'all are still here, so that means the microphone and the StreamYard's still working. That's good to know. What does that mean? So I'm reading some of your comments. That's a nice comment. This is the best idea for Black August. Well, I'm glad I came up with it. I'm sure somebody else probably came up with it, but I'm taking all the credit. Anyway. Yeah. The undefeated chat. We try to engage with y'all while we're doing the show, but I can't really do that and read. By the time I finish reading, come over here. Whatever you were commenting on is long gone. All right, a lot of folks ain't. I asked how y'all doing. Ain't doing nothing. Okay. Well, some of y'all say you all good. So I think what I'm going to do is at the very least, I'm going to read essay number 2, chapter number 2 in Safiya's book. And I don't know how long it's going to take, but I'm going to commit to chapter number 2. It's already 7:42, 12 minutes over, but I'm going to go with it. All right, chapter 2, testimony, experiences in the Black Panther Party. Now, this is another editor's note from Laura Whitehorn. In 1988 and 1989, Safiya testified at a deposition for Dhoruba bin Wahad. We all know Baba Dhoruba here on Black Liberation Media. In his federal suit against the FBI and the New York City Police Department. Dhoruba sued these agencies for illegal acts they had carried out against him, resulting in his imprisonment. The actions of the law enforcement agencies were part of the government counterintelligence program COINTELPRO. In 1990, as a result of the suit, Dhoruba was released from prison, his conviction reversed. For Dhoruba's case, Safiya agreed to be questioned by government attorneys about police and FBI attacks on the Black Panther Party. From a court transcript of her hours of testimony stretching over several days arises an unusually intimate portrait of the party's daily operations and culture. Okay, phew. The following are excerpts from Safiya's testimony. I still don't know how long this is going to be. But anyway, the following are excerpts of Safiya's testimony. They provide a sense of what went on in those days of resistance in the late 1960s and early 1970s, and of how it felt to be carrying out community organizing while surrounded by hostile and dangerous law enforcement agencies. It is a view of daily life during the heyday of COINTELPRO. All right. The Black Panther Party program. The Free Breakfast for Children program remains one of the better known community programs run by the BPP. The program was designed to provide free breakfast for school children so that they can concentrate better in school. The Black Panther Party had a 10-point program. We wanted land, bread, justice, housing, and peace. As our major political objective, we wanted a United Nations supervised plebiscite to be held throughout the Black colony, where only Black colonial subjects would be allowed to participate for the purpose of determining the will of the Black people concerning our national destiny. Different organizations were advocating establishing a Black nation on the land base of 5 separate states in the United States, or going back to Africa. We needed a plebiscite to see what the people wanted, and the party would go along with that, just like the Declaration of the Independence of the people, by the people. The government wasn't dealing with the needs of the people, and the people had the right to throw off that government and create a new government for the needs of the people. The media said we were advocating the overthrow of the government, but we were just doing the same thing the United States did when it declared its independence from England. It was an either-or situation. Either we become viable citizens with the same rights and recognition as everyone else, or we needed to look realistically at bringing about the changes necessary to govern ourselves. But before you could do anything else, you had to educate the Black community about what was going on. The purpose of the Black Panther Party was to establish revolutionary, politically powerful Black people. In order to carry out our purpose, we had to work. If you were going to bring about social change, you had to institute programs. Community service was part of the programs. I started working with the Panthers by working with the Free Breakfast for Children program, even before I was actually a member of the Panthers. I began in the spring of '69. I got up early in the morning and went over to Chambers Street Memorial Church in Manhattan and made breakfast for the children. I cooked breakfast for them, helped them with their homework, and got them off to school. Before I joined the party, I didn't believe the things being said about police brutality or about justice not being done. When the police acted against the community, I thought it was because there was something wrong being done by someone in the community. But once I became victimized myself, I began to look at what the Panthers were doing and saying differently. Once I joined the party, it became even more clear. Now, as I said, when I was reading from chapter 1, talking about how so many of our fiercest warriors may have been from the middle class, not necessarily working class, not necessarily lumpen, but may have been even petty bourgeoisie and, believers in Americanism and all this, that, and the other. And then something happened. Something sparked their consciousness, made them change. And Ida B. Wells was also one of those people. Ida B. Wells writes, she's got so many writings, but there's her autobiography, there's also her Memphis Diary, and then she's got the writings about lynching. She said she actually, in the beginning, she actually believed some of the accounts of the media that Black men was just out here wilding out. And it wasn't until people that she knew personally were murdered, were lynched, that she's like, wait a minute. None of these brothers engaged in quote-unquote lumping or criminal behavior. They were all gainfully employed and trying to operate their own business. One of these brothers was married to a wonderful sister, a friend of mine. I was godmother to their children. Why were they lynched? If the story about lynching is that Black men are rapist threats to Black women, how is it that these brothers end up being lynched? And that's what led her on that lifelong crusade for justice, which is also the title of her autobiography. Let me shut up. Back to Safiya Bukhari. For example, while I was working with the breakfast program, the number of children attended started dropping off. We went around and talked with the parents to try to find out why this was happening. What we found out was that the police were telling the parents we were poisoning the children, feeding the kids poisoned foods. That made me angry, and it was one of the things that encouraged me to take the next step and join the party. The police weren't feeding the children, but to keep us from feeding them, they were saying we were giving them poisoned food. So the children were doing without because of the police's own bigotry. That was a lesson for me in how the police lie, how the system lies and hurts people. I also learned that the cops were trying to discourage the merchants from donating food or providing other assistance to the program. Once again, this is the police doing this. This is not social welfare. This is not teachers. This is the armed arm of the state, the cops. A few times, I was responsible for picking up the donations from various merchants. I remember 2 times on 135th Street at a food co-op, the people told me that they'd been told by the cops that the food wasn't going for the breakfast program, that instead it was being resold. The police had told them the food wasn't being used for what it was supposed to be used for. Later, after COINTELPRO was revealed, we saw in the FBI files the actual letters that were sent to contributors talking about how the food and funds were not being used for what they were supposed to be used for. The letters said that the breakfast program was being used as a means to subvert the minds of the children and how dangerous it was. And we learned that this was done as part of that program to disrupt and destroy the Panther Party. And the same was done to liberation schools the party ran. While I worked in the breakfast program, I met members of the BPP who rotated responsibility for working in the program. They worked side by side with members of the community who volunteered in the breakfast program. Those members of the party were responsible for educating the rest of us for political education on joining the party. I remember I came into the Panther office and told the OD, the officer of the day, that I wanted to join. He gave me a handful of papers and rules and regulations and told me to study. I had to be at PE, political education classes. Political education included all the Panther politics and rules, the 10-point program and platform, the 8 points of attention, 26 rules and regulations of the Black Panther Party, the Red Book by Chairman Mao Zedong, and the basics. Things like do not swear at the masses, do not steal from the comrades on the masses, speak politely, etc. These classes were held for about an hour every night for all party members. But Wanda, that was Safiya's daughter, and I had intense class sessions at home because, maybe that wasn't her daughter. She had a daughter named Wanda, but anyway. But Wanda and I had intense class sessions at home because we were still going to school at the time, though I dropped out of college soon after. We also had skills from our education, so we could do more and had greater abilities, and therefore had to meet greater requirements. I used to edit things such as Bobby Seale's book, helping with grammar and typing. And we were being groomed to become teachers for the PE classes so that the responsibility for teaching didn't always fall on the same Panther members. I didn't know that at the time, but later it became clear. Technical education included breaking down weapons, learning how to put them together, blindfolded, and learning how the weapon works. We also learned never to aim a weapon at a person, a comrade, and not to play with loaded weapons. We learned weapon safety. Those of us with no criminal record applied for firearms licenses and used regular training facilities. I got a permit for long arms. We had legally registered firearms. The training involved firearms, never explosives. The physical education classes were more about how you handled yourself physically, hand-to-hand combat, and your health, being physically fit. We learned basic martial arts, how to defend ourselves. These classes took the form of drills, sometimes held in front of the office, other times held in Mount Morris Park in Harlem, and sometimes in Central Park, depending on the extent of the drills. If it was an endurance training where you had to run 3 miles instead of one, or if we were going to do extensive calisthenics and then run, or if we were going to do the kind of training that involved jumping out of a tree or hiding behind a tree, we would go to Central Park. I remember going through the calisthenics, the whole thing from jumping jacks to deep knee bends, then running from the office to wherever we were going to do the exercises, spending 45 minutes doing the exercises, then running back to the office. Some of the exercises involved climbing trees and survival techniques like learning the foliage. We also had pep rallies and pep talks. In addition, I was given a form for reporting my daily activities, including the time, what happened from the time you came into the office to the time you went off duty at the end of the day. I had to be at the office at about 8 a.m. If you were late, you were disciplined. You had to run around the block 5 times. That discipline was used for other things too. I was disciplined once for not changing my baby's diaper. I was brought up on charges for that. The child wore the diaper for so long that it constituted neglect. My daughter stayed in the office a lot, and if they felt she was not getting cared for properly, I was brought up on charges. I had to fulfill my parental responsibilities in addition to party ones. But another time, I was brought up on charges for stupid stuff. The party had a policy of free love. Well, they called it free love. I called it political pimping. One of the Panthers decided he wanted to sleep with me. I was brought up on charges of refusing to sleep with him. Charges had to be written. You had to be able to bring something up in a principled way. Then I could address the issues and defend myself. It was a procedure held right in the office. On the charge of child neglect, I was found guilty and suspended. I had to clean somebody's apartment building. Another time, Wanda and I were brought up on charges for fighting. I had a huge fear of snakes, and Wanda had thrown a rubber snake on me. Our punishment was to read Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth and each write a paper on what the book said about mental disorders. That time, our punishment included having to do security on weekends at a Panther facility. The section leader would go through the drills, calisthenics, etc., and then assign you a task for the day. And once I became a full-time party member, the work was 24/7. But you didn't work unless you were detailed to work. Everyone had a section. Mine was from 110th Street to 116th Street, between 8th Avenue and Pleasant Avenue. I had the barrio. The party earned money through newspaper sales, speaking engagements, and donations. Sales of the newspaper, pamphlets, and buttons brought in a lot. On party structure and programs. The other programs of the party at the time, in addition to the breakfast program, were the health clinic, housing, and tenant-landlord relations. We organized welfare parents. We organized against police brutality, and a lot of effort went into defending political prisoners. In New York, we were specifically organizing in support of the people arrested in the Panther 21 case. I worked on political prisoner support. I also belonged to the medical cadre of the party. We were responsible for the medical health of the people in the office and for setting up the health clinic, working with the community, taking care of the health needs of the party and the community. From about January 1971 to March that year, I was the officer of the day for the Harlem office at 202 7th Avenue. It was a storefront. The officer of the day opened the office, accounted for everything, including the security of the office, made assignments, and basically made any decisions necessary. Those who came through the office included party members, members of the National Committee to Combat Fascism, and community workers or members of the community. There were community workers and then there were members of the Black Panther Party. That's two different things. Following the split in the party later in 1971, I became communications and information officer of the East Coast faction, the quote-unquote Eldridge Cleaver faction of the party. I was part of the central leadership. I was also in charge of the national committees for defense of political prisoners within the party. At first, we just dealt with the Black Panthers who were incarcerated. Later, we began to deal with other political prisoners as well. After the arrest of the Panther 21 in April of 1969, there was a freeze on party recruitment. With the bust of the 21 came the uncovering of a number of undercover agents. A freeze was placed on membership so that anybody couldn't just come up and say, because I'm down and everything, I want to be a Panther, and just come into the party. A procedure was put in place, and you had to go through it to become a member. You had to prove you were trustworthy. People would join the NCCF in order to go through the process. Before the freeze on membership, the NCCF, National Committee to Combat Fascism, was also used to provide an organization to people who weren't Black but wanted to work with the party. After the freeze, it became predominantly Black. It was like a military academy in relation to the Army, a training ground. But from the outside, you couldn't tell who was NCCF and who was a party member. There was a Ministry of Information in the Bronx. That ministry was for the regional staff. The regional staff had the responsibility to determine who did what. They had regional meetings on Sunday mornings in the Bronx, and decisions would come down from there for the region. They decided what each member would do. In the Harlem office, we had a branch captain, then the officer of the day, the secretary, the section leader, and the subsection leader. I never stopped being a member of the party, but I did become a member of the Black Liberation Army once I went underground. Now, again, these are excerpts from her testimony. We don't have the questions. We don't know, what may have come before the excerpt that was chosen to be printed. We don't know necessarily what came after, what's in the book as coming after may not have come after. I don't know. But these are excerpts from her testimony at a deposition for Baba Daruba on the heightening of repression against the party. When I first joined the party, the morale was spirited. Later, that gave way to apprehension and guardedness. J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI in those days, declared the Black Panther Party the most dangerous threat to national security. Because of that, there was the Bureau of Special Services, BOSS, and the Red Squad, both in New York. They were in collusion to destroy us, along with the police department and the court system. This was how COINTELPRO played out on the local level. Later on, when I was in prison, I received my FBI files. Those files talked about informants inside the New York office of the Black Panther Party, informants who were in the office with me. During and after my arrest, I became aware of two undercover police officers, members of the New York City Police Department, who were assigned to be informants in the office. The media was working hand in glove with the police on this too. You didn't pick up a newspaper without seeing something about a crime being committed by the Black Panther Party. The mafia hadn't gone out of existence. There were still drugs downtown. There were those shadows in Chinatown. But they were not getting the press coverage that we were getting at this point. The connections between the police agencies have been documented in COINTELPRO files. But even before we saw those documents, we knew it had to be a national campaign. Logic dictated that all these things were connected. And just real quick, I want to say, just like when she says that the mafia was still there was crime in Chinatown, but all you heard was about the Panther Party in the media. Similar to how the Ku Klux Klan has never been seen as a black identity, as a white extremist identity organization, or has never been known as a terrorist organization. It's because they don't challenge the state. They are not considered to be, on the one hand, they are not considered to be a threat to the state because of ideology and the picking up of arms. But I believe also they are, it's because black people are seen as a threat because of, and I'd have to do this on a different broadcast, the way that anti-blackness was explained to me by Frank Wilderson. Shout out to I Mix What I Like and those early interviews with Frank Wilderson. Black people are an existential threat to white people. I'm just going to leave that there and keep it moving. We'll come back to that one day. Okay. Through these programs, a split was created between the East Coast and West Coast sections of the party. From about February 1971, when this occurred, the community programs stopped because all we could do was focus on self-defense work. When things settled down, we started the community programs again. But then there were more arrests and trials, and we had to cut back again to focus on those. And the fact that we were able to keep doing work as long as we did, in the face of all the trials, the deaths, the constant counterintelligence program activities that were happening, under all those pressures, we were able to survive. That was a success. We were there when the community needed us. We dealt with their problems. We kept the free health clinic going in Brooklyn. We worked with welfare mothers. We worked on housing issues. We protected the community, keeping the older people from being attacked in the streets. And we expected that the police would tap our phones. Even my mother assumed that. We expected that they would follow us and watch us. But some of the things they did, we did not envision. We did not envision that they would send undercover agents to come up with ideas that were badder than bad. We did not envision that they would be able to kill people and create huge divisions between people. We were not able to analyze what was happening when we were hit by COINTELPRO. That was a failure. We had to cut back and allow the attacks to stop us from doing community work. We reacted with more intensified rhetoric instead of continuing our programs. In the early days after I joined the party, the police consistently confiscated the newspapers Panthers were selling. I was never arrested, but I was told to get off the corner when I was selling papers. I would sell papers mostly in the community where I could do community work. But once I was down on 42nd Street selling papers, and I was told to move on by the police. They told me I couldn't sell papers there. I had to move. A uniformed officer got out his gun and a nightstick, and I moved. But the police arresting people was a daily thing. Panthers would be selling papers on the corner, and they'd end up getting arrested, going back and forth to court. And it got to a point where people were told to cop a plea to get it over with. Sometimes sisters were physically assaulted while being arrested. It was just a constant thing. We had to go in pairs so that if one person got arrested, the other one could call the office to tell people. In those early days, we had pep rallies and pep talks at the office and in the street out in front. But this changed at the point when the party went on the defense in late 1970 because conditions had changed. Then the drills became more about self-defense. At that time, the atmosphere became much more tense, more defensive. It was as if something was about to happen and we had to be prepared. In December 1969, two members of the Illinois Panther Party, Chairman Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, were gunned down in a pre-planned raid by the Chicago police. We later learned that the FBI had played a role in the attack, planting an informant among Fred's inner circle and drugging the Kool-Aid the Panthers had had with dinner. But even at the time, we knew the police had set the whole thing up. They claimed there were shots from inside the apartment, but it was proved quickly that all the shots were fired by the police, not by the Panthers. A few days later, there was an assault by police on the Los Angeles office of the Panther Party. Members were not required to carry a firearm until the fear of being attacked became so predominant that several of us were obligated to carry weapons for defense. And as the officer of the day in the Harlem office, I was one of those required to carry a weapon. This took place during the course of the split in the party. You never went anywhere by yourself. You never went anywhere without somebody in security knowing where you were. You couldn't be out of contact for any length of time without cause. This was around the time of the split in the party. We felt that we had two major enemies. We had the other side of the party, and we had the state apparatus. It was like being in a war situation, and you didn't know where your enemy was lurking. You were constantly looking over your shoulder. The media was saying that the Panthers were racist, anarchists, and thugs. But when I joined, I saw that the Panthers did not use violence against its members. They were not violent. But once the FBI began instigating through COINTELPRO, things changed. After the split, it was a time of paranoia. The resulting violence was totally opposed to what the party was about. COINTELPRO brought about a war inside the party. Through COINTELPRO, people worked under the guise of being Panthers and instigated incidents. Threats were made over the telephone, and we feared for our lives. They created a war atmosphere. One example of what happened was that one member, Robert Webb, was told in a phone call with the West Coast that people were coming to take care of him. Then in March 1971, he was shot and killed on 125th Street and 7th Avenue. To show further how the police were involved, this is now 1988, and no one has yet been tried or even arrested for Robert's death. It was if it were sanctioned. We all knew who killed Robert, and we made that very well known. It was even published in the paper, yet no one ever did anything. The person was a paid killer, receiving thousands of dollars. Robert was killed right out on a Monday afternoon in front of chock full of nuts on 125th and 7th Avenue. His bodyguard had been pistol whipped, and he was killed, and the police did nothing. It was clear that they were working in conjunction with the killers. So our paranoia wasn't really paranoia at all. We actually had a basis in fact to be on the defensive. We sandbagged the office and our living quarters, and security was beefed up. We weren't allowed to be around family members, and the children were put in safe locations. We were trying to protect our families and to continue as best we could doing our work. But finally, it was decided that the party could no longer function above ground because of the conditions. It was clear that differences that emerged between the West and East Coast Panthers provided a prime opportunity for the government to destroy the party. At that time, there were also a number of burglaries and break-ins at our houses. One time, files were destroyed at the office. Machinery was stolen. Another time, when I was living on St. Nicholas Avenue, a neighbor told me to look out my window because my car was being burglarized. Someone was in it. When I'd moved into the building, I did what was standard BPP procedure, letting all the neighbors know they are in the building with a Panther so that we'll look out for one another. After my neighbor called, I looked out the window and saw police going through my car with 2 squad cars parked nearby. One police officer was standing outside the car, and one was inside, going through the glove compartment. They actually stole some parking tickets out of the glove compartment. I hope they paid them. I called the police station and reported a burglary in process, but nobody ever came to investigate. Even after the party disbanded in the late 70s, people were watched and checked on, had their fingerprints checked, their phones tapped, their phone records subpoenaed. This section is called The Use of Torture by Police Against the BPP. I got 8:15 p.m. LA time. Ooh, seemed like there's a bunch of y'all still here. Oops. I left that comment up. Dope work. So I see somebody's still here. Some of y'all, somebody's still here. I see somebody said good night. All right. So for some of y'all who are still here, I'm going to finish reading this chapter, and that'll at least be 2 chapters in. And if, as I said earlier, if you can't hang, I appreciate you hanging this far, and you'll get it all on the next one. Come back and, press play afterwards to see what you missed. I appreciate y'all hanging with us, sister. All right. Still in chapter 2. This section is called The Use of Torture by Police Against the BPP. In May 1971, Reuben Scott, a California member of the Panthers, was tortured to try to force him to testify against Herman Bell, Anthony Jalil Bottom, and Albert Neal Washington, known as the New York Three. He was arrested in New Orleans and tortured. He was beaten and had cattle prods applied to his genitals. Pins were stuck into him. He was beaten so badly that he made statements in New Orleans that were later thrown out by a judge. They could not be admitted in court because they were the result of extensive torture. And a New York City district attorney and New York City detectives were on the scene. They also threatened him with other cases, murders, if he didn't testify. He subsequently testified against the New York Three and then recanted his testimony. Since that time, he has appeared on television, on Gil Noble's show Like It Is, and told what happened to him. He made his position known and signed an affidavit to that effect. But when he attempted to tell the judge at the New York Three trial in New York City about what had happened, the judge consulted with the district attorney, and Scott was not permitted to recant. Other ex-Panthers were also tortured in New Orleans at the same time, but not to the same degree as what happened to Reuben. Most of the time, when someone testified against other Panthers, it was not members of the party who did the testifying. It was wives or friends or someone who was arrested at the time. For the most part, members of the party weren't the people who were forced to give testimony. All this made it very hard to continue carrying on the work of the breakfast program and other programs of the party. Okay, so that is the end of that chapter. And again, she's got footnotes throughout. Chapter 3 is called Marriage Contract between Safiya Bukhari and Michael M. Ashanti Alston. I will be going into that next week. Just like I will be going into the other chapters of Stand Up, Struggle Forward, Sanyika Shakur's book. So I try not to keep people long. I used to hate that when I was healthy. I definitely ain't hanging around long now that me and Mr. Arthritis have such an intimate relationship. So it's 8:19 p.m. I had said we were going to do 2 hours, 5 to 7:30. An hour reading each chapter. And then that other time was for, my 2 cents discussing the stuff that I knew that I felt would add value to the readings, trying to answer your questions or what have you. So that's where we are at 8:19 p.m. As always, I appreciate you all hanging out with me. This has been the first, I don't want to call it a class, the first meeting of the Black August Study and Struggle Book Club. We went through the first 2 chapters of Safiya Bukhari's War Before, first 2 chapters of Sanyika Shakur's Stand Up, Struggle Forward. So, if you have not already, please like, please share the link, please subscribe to my personal Rootwork channel, and subscribe to Black Liberation Media if you haven't already subscribed. And subscribe means you'll be made aware, as opposed to always looking. We appreciate if you're not a subscriber. We appreciate you looking, checking the channel to see what's good. But when you become a subscriber, you should get automatic notification, and you can also support us financially so that we can continue to do this type of work. So the more I think about it, for the subsequent Sundays that we'll be doing this the rest of the Sundays here in August, starting at 5 p.m. LA time. That's 8 p.m. East Coast time. I'm probably going to stay off camera because I began this sitting upright in my bed, and now I have had to lay sideways. And y'all don't need to see that. Y'all need to just focus on my voice and what I'm reading and communicate with each other in the chat. So that's probably how we're going to do that right there. How we do that there. So, again, thank you for hanging out. Appreciate the heck out of y'all. I am going to shut it down for tonight. You all have a good week. Enjoy the rest of the programs on Black Liberation Media. And I will see y'all. Y'all won't see me. You see what I did there? I will see y'all next Sunday. All right now. Peace.
Nothing in Deborah Jones's formative years could have prepared her for life in the US organization. Like many of her generation, she was Black and proud before the phrase became popular. She believed, and still believes, in the principles for which the organization stood. But her life took a horrific turn on Mother's Day 1970, leaving her in trauma and in silence. In this never-before-told account, Deborah Jones's inspiring story is told. What We Stood For, the story of a revolutionary Black woman, by Deborah Jones and Thandisizwe Chimurenga, is the compelling and harrowing memoir of one woman's experiences in a leading Black power organization.
Black Liberation Media is a collective of Black and African organizers, journalists, academics, and media personalities serving Black and African masses seeking to further grow in their understanding of themselves, their histories, and the African world through entertainment and news. Please continue to like, subscribe, and donate to the channel so we can further serve you and liberate our people. You can also go to blkliberationmedia.org, get some merchandise, and also become a Patreon member and a member from the YouTube. Please do what you can, share, and show your love as we will show ours for you. Black Liberation Media.